Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to my 400 affiliates. I'm glad you're there. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Out of character for me this morning, I normally begin the week with a rundown of all of the news stories of the week. But there was one huge story on Thursday of last week, which didn't get covered on Friday, began to emerge on Saturday, which was the meeting of Team China and Team Biden in Anchorage, Alaska, which was actually an insult hurl and an obvious collision of visions for the future between the new presidential team and the old Marxist-Leninist team from China. Now, there have been 4 books in the last 10 years that have mattered about China. Kissinger on China in 2012, Graham Allison's The Thucydides Trap in 2015, and The 100-Year Marathon by Michael Pillsbury in 2016. Now along comes, and if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding it up, Chaos Under Heaven by Josh Rogan, Washington Post foreign affairs correspondent. And it has now entered the pantheon of looming tower on this show. I'm going to be asking people, have you read the Chaos Under Heaven when you come on, for a variety of reasons, which I'll get into. Josh Rogan, the author of Chaos Under Heaven, joins me now. Good morning, Josh. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. Thanks so much for having me on.
Did you, were you surprised by that collision that occurred in Anchorage?
No, I think, in fact, it was inevitable. I think that, the Biden administration, given the reality of our relationship with China and the reality of American politics, had no choice but to go to Anchorage and say the things that they said, which is that the United States could no longer remain silent in the face of the increasing Chinese Communist Party, internal repression, and external aggression. And it's not surprising to me at all that the Chinese side is not happy about that. Now, it was surprising to me that they were so public and so bold, so brazen. And we can talk about why that is. But on the one hand, it shows that they may see weakness in the United States and they're testing the Biden administration. On the other hand, they may feel insecurity back at home.
No, I wanted to point out that in Chaos Under Heaven, and the lunch rule is we have to say the book name 7 times in each segment in order for people to remember it and buy it. And I really do want every single person listening to go and buy the book from Amazon this morning. Buy it for your friends. It's not a Democratic book, not a Republican book. It's an American book because it's about America versus China, and it's the struggle of our life and of our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives. So go and get Chaos Under Heaven. But it reminds me, Thursday's confrontation, that the same thing happened to Obama and the same thing happened to Trump. And indeed, it may be said to have happened to Bush with the Hunan Island incident, which nobody remembers anymore. But the Chinese, since Clinton, have opened every presidency with a challenge.
Well, that's exactly right. And, you're right about the book. It's not a pro-Trump book. It's not an anti-Trump book. It's not a pro-China book. It's not an anti-China book. It's just the best I could do to figure out what happened in these crucial 4 years as our nation turned its attention finally to the rising challenge from the East. Now, what's funny about what you just said is that the exact Chinese official who delivered the exact same message to the Trump people at the opening of my book was Yang Jiechi, the same official who delivered that message you saw on YouTube against Anthony Blinken on Friday. And that's not a coincidence. The Chinese government has kept up the same personnel because they have kept up the same strategy, which is to increasingly challenge not only the United States' preeminence in the world, but also the world order that we built with our friends and allies. While we keep changing strategies, their strategy has been remarkably consistent. And it's only recently that we've sort of woken up to that fact.
Now, let me embarrass Josh a little bit. My quick review of the book. Nested in a superb page turner, and it really is, on the political knife fighting inside the Trump administration. And it's full of that, and it's the best reported book because everything I know to be true, I don't know everything to be true, but everything that I know to be true is in the book. And so I'm trustworthy of that which I don't know to be true because it's been confirmed by careful reporting what I know to be true, is a comprehensive, necessary reveal of China 2021. Headed towards China in control of Taiwan and the South China Sea, omnipotent power globally, an unreformed Marxist-Leninist superpower far more ominous in design and means than the USSR ever was or could become. They are the barbarians inside our gates, even though they consider us barbarians. And it's a must-read, an absolute go-to, and order it this morning book because most people don't get this. We've gotten this on this show since, well, at least 15 years ago. But China has become the central dilemma of our time, and the Nixon-Kissinger years, their engagement strategy, repudiated by Nixon himself in 1994 in a conversation with William Safire, and most recently by Mike Pompeo at the Nixon Library, remains kind of a haze and a fog through which Americans walk, Josh Rogan. I gather it is your attempt to clear away that fog that led to chaos under heaven.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, as it turns out, the rise of China is a complex thing, but not something that can be relegated to the discussion of ivory towers or just the China hands that have been mismanaging this relationship, frankly, for the last 40 years. And while I was writing this book, urging Americans to wake up to the challenge of a rising China in our academia, on Wall Street, and Silicon Valley, and Hollywood, something amazing happened. Actually, all of these institutions of American society started to figure it out from themselves, because China's actions outside of its borders all of a sudden started to impact everyone, from the NBA to the airlines to your local student at your local school. So that was a broad awakening that was already happening before the pandemic hit. Once the pandemic hit, then every human in every country realized that what happens in Beijing no longer stays in Beijing.
And Chaos Under Heaven brings it all together, beginning with the most important point of the book. There is a genocide underway with the Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang, and it began in 2014. It's expanded to genocide as formally declared by then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and endorsed by now Secretary of State Tony Blinken in his confirmation hearing. There is no doubt about it, and everyone has to measure their complicity with it. And you detail it. I've had some people refer to the 380 camps. I've had other guests on who've hinted at it, described it, but you actually lay out the details, Josh Rogan. It may be the first major book that discusses the Uyghur genocide.
Well, yeah, thanks for noting that. I spent a lot of time with Uyghurs who had survived the camps and the family members of Uyghurs who are still in the camps, and that's almost every Uyghur journalist in the United States has family members in the camp. There's a reason for that. It's because the Chinese Communist Party has been targeting anyone with any foreign ties and literally disappearing all of their family members in its broad campaign of atrocities and coercion. Now, what's amazing about the Uyghur story is it sort of puts a lie to this idea that, it's just these hawkish Americans who want to start a Cold War with China, which is what you'll hear not only coming out of the far left in America, but also coming out of the Chinese Communist Party propaganda outlets. And the truth is, and I think Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan would say this clearly, is that it was actually the Chinese Communist Party that changed the relationship by committing mass atrocities and committing all of this aggression and repression, and we're responding to that. So it's not these crazy China hawks in Washington who want to start a Cold War. It's the world's response to China's actions as it rises, and the Uyghur genocide is just the most glaring, awful example of that.
Now, Josh, when I was a college student in the late 70s, South Africa divestment became an issue of campus activism, and there was a legitimate issue, and it did spur change in South Africa. Will divestment from China reach that level of student activism? Because it is a far, far cry from the other things that get people upset. It is just the decimation of a people. Will it actually engage the American imagination?
Unfortunately, a campaign of boycotting China is not practical because of the deep interconnectedness of our economies. But you are seeing on campus a rising activism against Chinese atrocities, but also Chinese Communist Party influence on those campuses. And what you're also seeing is a broad push for what we call limited decoupling. That's moving our critical supply chain so that if we ever get into, another pandemic situation, the Chinese government won't be able to do what it did this time, which is to blackmail us by holding PPE and masks over our head while telling us to shut up about their handling of the pandemic. So, in other words, this is another reason that the Cold War analogy is so poor and this Thucydides trap idea is so ridiculous to apply to the U.S. and China, because China is so big and so complex and will have the largest economy. So we can't attach these bumper sticker labels to the relationship and think that we figured it out. It's just going to be a new kind of challenge that really has no precedent, both in its character and also in its scope and scale.
Now, the new thing that I learned, and I've had on, all of these people, I've had on Pillsbury and Graham Allison and Kissinger, is I did not understand the financial entanglement and the index fund reflex. We have 30 seconds to the break, Josh. I don't know if you can get it in, but this is truly menacing.
Wall Street has been pumping trillions of U.S. dollars, directing it into Chinese companies that are building the military machine pointed at us and building the concentration camps And that was something that Wall Street has orchestrated over 30 or 40 years. And now we're trying to untangle it. And you have to decide as an investor, do you want to invest in the concentration camps? Do you want to invest in the Chinese military? We need to at least know where our money is so we know what we're doing with it.
And the money is now parked in index funds, which are cutouts for obvious Chinese government connection. We'll come back with Josh Rogan. Go during the break. Go to Amazon. Order Chaos Under Heaven. Please do it today. I'll be right back with Josh Rogan. Follow him on Twitter at Josh Rogan.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
What is the reality for you and your deputies when it comes to the last 58 days in America? Have things changed for you when it comes to illegal migration in your county, Sheriff?
Oh, absolutely. And it's been a disastrous change. It is not a change that we welcomed or are enjoying, that's for sure. You know, immediately overnight, we started having, the last 2 months we've had 40-plus pursuits where they end in a bailout, which means that they run from us, they stop, everybody bails out of the vehicle into the desert. Typically, they'll leave somebody behind. Like we had one where 12 people bailed out of the car and they left a 16-year-old Guatemalan girl behind because they know that we're going to have to deal with this unaccompanied minor while all of them go free into this country. Last Wednesday alone, we had 49 apprehensions in one day. It's not uncommon for us to go out and have 20 apprehensions. And mind you, I'm 60 miles off the border. That's how far they're infiltrating into our country. Camouflage clothes. They don't want to be caught. And here's what I know I'm kind of running on, and I'll give you a second.
No. We need to know. Our listeners, our viewers need to know. So you tell us what's changed.
You know, and what I keep telling people, this isn't about immigration anymore. This is about human trafficking and drug trafficking into this country. And if you care about human beings, it shouldn't matter what party you are. If you care about protecting those people, then you should absolutely care about border security, because the cartel is using these people as to gain money. They're raping the women. They're using the children as pawns, which is clear as day right now, and they extort the men.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
I just got an email about someone who says they have to take mandated racial diversity seminar training or whatever it is. And all I have to say is that there is a piece of art, and I don't use that word lightly, that is so perfect, so funny, so politically incorrect, that hits this perfectly. It's from the legendary show The Office. Now, The Office started as an unbelievably politically incorrect show, and then it got into this kind of like quasi-woke thing later on. but the episode Diversity Day with Steve Carell, it's so politically incorrect, especially in today's time. I'm just going to tell you something right now. If I dared repeat some of the lines here, it wouldn't even be an advertiser boycott. I'd be an advertiser.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt talking with Josh Rogan, Washington Post foreign correspondent, about his brand new book, Chaos Under Heaven. During the break, I tweeted out a link about it. Josh, what I like about this book, the reason it's readable, is it does include these pen portraits of the key players in Team Trump era, and some from Obama and some from Biden, but you've got them grouped. Superhawks, which I think is a misnomer. Bannon, Navarro, and Miller are really iconoclastic opportunists. And I've known Peter for 30 years. Charming man, doesn't believe in anything except himself. Bannon is sort of a super grifter. Miller just wants to be close to the president. The hardlighters are the vice president, Pompeo, O'Brien, Pottinger, Barr, and Ray. They're the serious people. The Wall Street clique, Mnuchin and Kudlow, and then the axis of adults who are really kind of clueless people wandering in and out. Although Jim Mattis is a friend of mine, he admits he doesn't know anything about China. And then you have the incompetents, Tillerson, or the incompatibles, Bolton. This clash of personnel, and then the family. You detail it, but most people on this show know Pompeo, they know O'Brien, they know Cotton. Gallagher is a weekly guest. He replaced Pompeo as a weekly guest. They know Pottinger, Kissel, Alex Wan, Alex Gray, John Newton, Nadia Shadlow. They're all guests on the Hugh Hewitt Show, and they're all members of the Nixon seminar. My guess is these are the people that the Biden people will talk to, and everybody else won't matter to Team Biden.
Well, yeah, that's largely right. I mean, in essence, you had a bunch of people that were working to change the government and the way that our government was pointed and where the resources were, where the attention was. And those were the people that you just mentioned. And they were less concerned with politics and more concerned with policies. So when the Biden people look at that, they say, okay, well, what are the things that in government that we can actually save? And then they look at the political things and the things that people like Bannon Navarro did, and they say, well, those things are politically poisonous to us now. So, what we find is that the people who actually did the work inside the government and who actually, did the work that was productive, that's the work that's ultimately being continued, and that includes a lot of sanctions. It includes a lot of investigations. But I don't blame the Biden people for taking a close look at all of the Trump administration policies and going through them one by one. To their credit, they've kept a lot of them so far.
To make sure people understand, I saw people like Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Mnuchin personally get along very, very well. They respected each other's intelligence, though their point of views were different. But Mulvaney is the fellow that you pinpoint. I think Mulvaney was the problem here. I believe he was a pleasant North Carolina small-town lawyer, state legislator, congressman who got thrown into geopolitics. And unless you study it for a life, you have no... I started in 1979 with Richard Nixon. You've been doing this for how long, Josh?
20 years.
Yeah, so I've got 50 years doing it. You got 20 years doing it. And there is no excuse for doing it. You put the amateurs in there like Rex Tillerson and Mick Mulvaney. All they did was screw up stuff.
Right. As it turns out, it's very easy to destroy parts of government, very hard to rebuild them. And, Mick Mulvaney's main problem was that he was so politically focused that he ignored the advice of the national security experts and the health experts, by the way, especially when the pandemic hit. And that led to policies that not only resulted in unnecessary suffering from hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans, but also ended up harming the president's reelection chances because Mulvaney didn't want to believe that the pandemic was real. He wouldn't listen to O'Brien and Pottinger and Pompeo, and he convinced the president to delay critical response measures in conjunction with the message that the president was getting from Xi Jinping, who was lying about the virus the whole time. So when he also
repeatedly cut defense spending at OMB, and then Russ, his deputy, did it again and again and again. He was actually the disaster that happened in the course of this thing. I am curious, though, whether you think the presence of John Kerry and Susan Rice and Wendy Sherman, who you identify as weak links in the Obama chain of appeasement and who are now back, will yield their place and their influence to people like Sullivan and Blinken, who are serious about China.
They won't yield it easily, but right now it seems that Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan have the ball, and that's shown by the fact that they were given the first meetings. But behind the scenes, you can be sure that John Kerry and Susan Rice are sharpening their knives. And the idea is to wait to see if Sullivan and Blinken fall on their face and then pick up the pieces. And there's also a clash coming when, John Kerry is working on a parallel track to establish a climate change deal, including by working with the Chinese. When that comes to a head will be when he brings that to the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and then his former staffer, who's now his boss, so to speak, has to tell him that that's not going to work because the U.S.-China relationship doesn't allow for it, and then the President of the United States will have to make a decision. So the real battles over China and the Biden administration have yet to come.
We saw a good start by Blinken and Sullivan at Anchorage. They would not back down, but in our last segment, Josh Rogan and I are going to talk about the issue set. The Uyghurs are most important, but there are many others. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
It is not normal, and my best argument is my antipathy to the veil that many Muslim women wear. It dehumanizes them. So why doesn't this mask dehumanize you? There used to be a saying about someone who did something shameful. This guy can't show his face around town anymore. Show your face. That's you. It may be fair, it may be unfair. That is you. You're hiding your face for a year for no good reason. I see these ads for masks. Do you know, we all fantasize, and I'm not speaking about the erotic, I'm speaking about fantasizing other things. So we all fantasize something that would just change a lot. I have one. Here's a fantasy. That there were as many ads telling people not to wear masks outside as there were telling them to wear it outside. But no, I'll bet you no billboard company would put it up. Right? I mean, what if we just quoted from scientific literature, masks outdoors are generally useless?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Folks, I'm talking to Anne McElhenney and Phelim McAleer. You have a film that you are on the verge of making. It's called My Son Hunter, and it's about Hunter Biden.
When you think about it, this should be the opening skit on every Saturday Night Live.
I was just going to say, precisely, yes.
I mean, and you know, I don't like making fun of alcoholics being Irish, you know, but the politics is so funny. I mean, this guy, as Anne said, you know, thrown out of the Navy, alcoholic, drug addict,
gets a stripper pregnant.
Who hasn't? You know, he goes to rehab, meets a homeless woman on the way into rehab called Bicycles, because she's always got a bicycle, goes off and lives with her for 3 months. This is by his own admission. But the joke, the real joke here is, who did Burisma? They did an international executive search, and who did they decide was the best person for their
on the
force?
planet Earth, after a deep dive, you know, in really checking out all the people available and doing all background checks. This is the one guy you want on your energy board.
He's a crack addict. He's filmed himself in pornographic acts and put it on the web. Jimmy Carter had a brother named Billy who was constantly getting Jimmy Carter in trouble. I remember this as a kid and thinking how embarrassing it would be to have somebody close to you in the family who's saying things and doing things. This is that times a billion. He's compromising. Imagine if Billy Carter had been talking to the Soviets Imagine if Billy Carter had been doing back deals with the Soviets.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
I'm a teacher in an elementary school, and a lot of our professional development is on racism because our school is very diverse in that population. And one of the professional development we had was on diverse books and the lack of diverse books. Mm-hmm. So basically the statistics they gave us was that, this is from 2018, that 50% of all children's books that are published are based on characters who are white. So 50% white, 27% are animals or other, things besides people. 10% is based on blacks, 7% on Asian Pacific or Asian people, 5% on Latinos, and then 1% on American Indians. And how this is an example of systemic racism, and it's very hard to find diverse books.
My first thought, Mary, is who sat around and added them all up like that? I mean, that's just amazing to me. Right? That's stunning to me. The good book is a good book. A good character is a good character. Huckleberry Finn had all sorts of references and N-words in it, but it was about a bondage between a black man and a young white boy. And it was a wonderful story. How that's become racist is beyond me. Mary, the other point I want to make is presumably all of this is to make sure the kids have good self-esteem. As I've said on my program, going back over decades, black kids have higher self-esteem than white kids. Black girls have higher self-esteem than
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt with Josh Rogan, Washington Post foreign correspondent, author of this book, Chaos Under Heaven, Trump, Xi, and the Battle for the 21st Century. If you know how obsessed I became with the looming tower for 20 years, from 2000 to 2020, as long as I'm on the air, I'll be talking about this because it's up to date. It covers everything right now. Josh, you did a lot of reporting for this. You accompanied National Security Council Ambassador O'Brien, and full disclosure, very good friend of mine, on his trip to Phoenix. I couldn't go because of a conflict of interest, but he had a long talk with you there about the fact that it's a Marxist-Leninist party. People will not understand the Chinese Communist Party until they understand that Xi really believes. Do you believe what O'Brien was telling you about that?
To a large degree, yes. I think one of the greatest epiphanies of the Trump administration and what we learned from that era is that, this idea of trying to change China to be more like us didn't work, and it can't be our goal anymore. And we can't pretend that we're in the process of convincing China to liberalize. China's development is going to be driven by the Chinese people, whether we like it or not. And while we want to see change inside China, of course, especially regarding the atrocities, we have to focus first on dealing with China's behavior inside of our borders and inside the borders of our allies and our friends and our partners. So seeing China for what it is, not for what we wish it to be, and then speaking with truth and candor and then dealing with that reality is, I think, one of the things that the Trump administration got right.
That's why we called the Nixon seminar on conservative realism and national security exactly what we call it. It brings in most of the Trump alums who were in the hardliner category, along with some who are outside of the government, and gets them to focus on the reality, conservative reality. Now, I want to talk about some of the issues that you bring up. The only quarrel I have substantively with you is your characterization of Tom Cotton on February 16th on Fox as a conspiracy. He was on my show on February 18th. I began talking about COVID in the second week of January. And Tom was careful to point out it couldn't be ruled out, which is different from saying that it happened. What is the extent of Chinese Communist Party deception about the origins of COVID?
Right. I mean, to be clear, what Tom Cotton said in February about the origin of the coronavirus wasn't totally incorrect in terms of the words. What I tried to point out in the book, perhaps inelegantly, is that he said this at a time when China was blackmailing the U.S. government with masks and PPE that we desperately needed, and that started a political controversy that actually ended up making the situation a little bit more difficult than it otherwise needed to be. But as we're learning a year after the start of the virus, that the origin of the virus is still not known, and I don't know what it is, you don't know what it is, but we need to find out, not just for blame, but for scientific understanding and to prevent the next pandemic, which will surely come. And what I lay out in the book is that the argument that human error involving the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the world's leading center of coronaviruses, can't be ruled out and must be investigated. And even though that issue got politicized during the pandemic, it's still an open question and one that we need answers to.
Josh Rogan, one of the heroes of Chaos Under Heaven is Congressman Jim Banks of Indiana. Again, no stranger to this audience. I did not know, though, upon being briefed on the extent, and I'm going to have you discuss the extent, of Chinese influence operations in the United States, particularly through the ubiquitous Confucius Institute. He picked up the phone to the president of Indiana University and said, if you do not close it, you will not get another dime of Pentagon spending. It was closed later that day. I think the Banks example ought to be followed by every congressman in the United States. And if so advised a couple over the weekend, he really acted on what is, it's mind-boggling how much they've spent in the United States to capture and influence our elite institutions.
Well, that's exactly right. This is how the Chinese interference in our politics is much different and, in a sense, much more dangerous than the Russian influence in our politics, because they do it gradually over time with billions of dollars. And what they do is they capture elites in both parties and seed institutions with billions of dollars of money until they're compromised. And, you know, the Confucius Institute is a difficult one because they're all different. And the one in GW, where I went to school, which I joined to see if there was any influence, turned out not to be so bad. But at a lot of other schools around the country, there are real examples of real abuse, both silencing Chinese students, trying to silence American students and teachers, and also there's intelligence collection risks as well. So what Congressman Banks did, which was to use his influence and his power to shut down one of the Confucius Institutes, may have been a good thing in the end, but it can't be the way that we address this very complicated problem, because this has to be dealt on a legislative and policy level, and we can't have every congressman calling up presidents of every university to tell them to shut down their Confucius Institutes. We have to have a better strategy than that. So I think that, you know, that's a good example of a story where the right outcome occurred, but we really need to think a bit more strategically about how we deal with Chinese influence inside of our borders, which is a growing problem.
There is also a great section on the extent of the attempted and often successful organizational capture by the Chinese Communist Party of every international organization that they intend to dominate, beginning with, 13 out of 16 UN arms, beginning with the W8. I mean, it's really quite, well, Richard Nixon said to me the first time I met him, 1978, Americans think in terms of decades, Russia in generations, in Chinese centuries. They began and they have executed a flawless takeover strategy.
It's amazing that the Trump administration found 26 UN organizations, 26 who had signed memorandums of understanding with China's Belt and Road Initiative. In other words, the UN was funding and executing China's economic aggression and China's economic strategy against us, and we weren't even aware of it. And now we're aware of it. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And, you know, I argue in the book that we have to re-engage these institutions. And, you know, we have to look clear-eyed at the Trump administration. They made some mistakes. And one of the mistakes I think they did make was by withdrawing from a lot of these organizations. You and I may even disagree with that, and that's fine. But in essence, the vacuum that we left was filled by Chinese actors and other bad actors. And that's why one reason why we have a UN system that's just lousy with Chinese corruption right now.
I also want to point out in Chaos Under Heaven, there is a primer on the tech war, which began in Team Trump years. You accurately, I believe, identify Eric Schmidt and Google as being the prime problem in the United States. You accurately recount Mark Zuckerberg's turn. There is a great deal of tech compromise and a great deal of tech suspicion. Apple does not win any prizes in your book, but it is something that I think cries out for bipartisan legislation. We have to have a national security oversight of these groups, Josh Rogan, because the surveillance system, AI, supercomputing, quantum computing, and surveillance are the issues on which, if China gains an edge, Dr. Kissinger told the Nixon seminar last month, we will not get it back if they gain an edge. We will not ever get it back.
Yeah, I think China's encroachment and investment and co-option of Silicon Valley is a huge problem that we have yet to really wrap our minds around. And, what happened was when the national security community started knocking on the door of these tech companies, it didn't always go well because there's a lot of distrust between those two institutions. And, we don't have a system like in China where the government can just tell all the tech companies what to do and they just snap into line. We have to actually deal with these industries on the basis of cooperation. And I think that's the key. That's the trick here, is to start not only a dialogue about national security, but about how all of these industries and the national security community must work together to solve these complex challenges. Because, in the end, national security and tech and Wall Street and academia, they're all one issue on the Chinese side, right? On the Chinese side, they think of this all together, and we think of these things all separately. And that's one of the big, sort of leaps that we have to make as a government, but also as a society.
We really need smart people in positions of continuous influence. And here I want to turn to Matt Pottinger and Mike Gallagher, who share both of them promoted to me by Robert O'Brien, who collected early on a group of people, even when he was special envoy for hostage affairs, working for Pompeo. He collected a group of these young people. He promoted Pottinger as soon as he got there. But I did not know about Pottinger's bills paper. I did not know about the iteration of his two classified overviews. I didn't know about the Gallagher iteration of Bill's paper. It is clear that some people arrived with an agenda and they stuck with it and they demonstrated to young people how to move the ball.
Well, that's right. While the press was mostly focused on the politics at the top level, Bannon and Navarro and this and that, there was something else going on behind the scenes. And you covered some of that, a lot of that actually. And what I added to this was the fact that Matt Pottinger, the first day he came into the administration, laid out a document that was proposing a broad shift, and it was called a rebalance in Asia. And the idea was to reset the relationship, not to blow it up, not to take down the CCP, but to recognize that our relationship with China had fallen way out of whack because the Chinese government had changed, because Xi Jinping had decided to take their system in a different direction, and we had yet to mount a sufficient strategic response. And that paper, which he called Bill's paper, became the basis for a lot of U.S. policy that really continues to this day. And, what I argue in the book is that the reason that guys like Pottinger and Gallagher and others were successful was not because they were so smart or because they had such great Machiavellian bureaucratic tactics. It's because the Chinese Communist Party proved them right. Because their argument was that the Chinese Communist Party was going in the wrong direction, and Xi Jinping went in the wrong direction, and now we have no choice but to respond.
You also noted in the book that Mike Pompeo was 6 months early. I believe Tom Cotton was also early. As a result, I believe in the top tier. I think actually China is going to be the issue in the 2024 election. Josh Rogan, I think the issue in the way that Russia was in 1980. Agree or disagree?
Yes, but I think it's inevitable that China will become a rising issue in U.S. politics. But I argue there's also a risk there that the issue can become overly politicized, and that we have to make sure that we don't fall into that trap, because that's exactly what the Chinese Communist Party wants. They want to divide us. They want to play upon our social divisions and our political divisions. So what I argue continuously is that we have to find a measure of bipartisanship and American pride and American ingenuity to come together to solve this problem. And if it becomes just the Republicans versus the Democrats versus the media, well, then that's going to actually play right into Beijing's hand.
Last question, Josh Rogan, and we'll talk again on Thursday in a different hour, so more people hear about chaos under heaven. And I emphasize again, people, you need to go read this and give it to people. Go make it #1 on Amazon. A senior East Asia diplomat told me in person on Thursday that Taiwan will be absorbed by China by 2027. That is Xi's plan. He is moving forward on it. It will not come via invasion. It will come via the Hong Kong tactics. Your assessment of that dire prediction?
Well, I think we have an opportunity to influence the course of events between now and 2027. And what the Trump administration showed is that if we stand up to China, the whole world doesn't fall apart. It doesn't mean we head into some sort of conflict. It doesn't mean we're headed towards a Cold War. Those are bumper stickers. Don't believe it when people tell you that we have a false choice between standing up to the Chinese Communist Party or doing nothing. So when it comes to Taiwan, I'm sure that Xi Jinping will try everything he's permitted and allowed to do to exert Chinese control over that island, that country, that group of 23 million people who have been free for all of this time and have no intention of going back into a system where they're not free. And the question really is whether or not we're going to stand in his way And that we can't do that alone. We have to do that with our allies and our partners. It's not going to be easy, but that's just the situation that we're in. And, in my experience, America tends to rise to the challenge. I hope we will again.
Congratulations, Josh Rogan. I hope you continue to cover this as comprehensively as you have. We will talk again on Thursday for a longer podcast. Congratulations. Has the book been well received?
I've been getting tons of positive reaction, except for the Chinese Communist propaganda trolls.
Oh, my goodness. I know what that's like, and they must be all over it, so I do not believe the Amazon reviews posted by trolls. Believe me, America, go get chaos under heaven and do it today. Thank you, Josh.
Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
You know how many times he said it now? I think it's 4. I think he has accidentally called his vice president 4 times. What do you think the mainstream news media would be doing if Donald Trump accidentally called Mike Pence President Pence 4 times? They would be a 24-hour vigil for when they were going to put a straitjacket on Trump and take him out of the White House into the local mental institution. But when Joe Biden does it, well, it's Joe Biden. Wait, let me guess. Is it his stutter again? He's got this stutter that everybody says, his defenders say, is the reason he can barely speak in complete paragraphs. He's worried about his stutter. Is that, here it was, cut 1, Joe Biden talking about a vaccination center in Arizona. Listen to how he describes the vice president of the United States.
Now, when President Harris and I took a virtual tour of a vaccination center in Arizona not long ago, one of the nurses on that tour, injecting people, giving vaccinations, said that each shot was like administering a dose of hope.
Yes, dose of hope. We're going to need it because when you watch the news, it sounds like we're all still dropping dead from COVID everywhere.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Jerry Boyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. The Congressional Budget Office just released its new debt figures. The national debt this year will top 102% of GDP. This has only happened twice before, both during World War II. This number does not count the proposed $1.9 trillion stimulus bill, nor does it count the money which was borrowed from Social Security, since that's considered intergovernmental debt. Debt levels this high break the intergenerational covenant that we have with our children and grandchildren. FDR borrowed to defeat the Nazis and Imperial Japan. Money well spent. Reagan borrowed to defeat the Soviet Union. That was also money well spent. These great projects made the world better for future generations. But our political class is not buying victories against international threats. They are buying political victories for incumbents. This is nothing more than fiscal abuse, and our kids will pay the price. It needs to stop. Now. I'm Jerry Boyer.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
This isn't, as some have portrayed it, as some kind of spontaneous, random, organic response to Joe Biden being president. This is being institutionally organized for the profit of the cartels, correct?
Absolutely. And the cartels understand what our politics and our policies are better than we do as Americans. And they knew where Joe Biden was leaning in his administration, and they were more than willing and more than ready to help accommodate.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Master Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine, Scott Stalker is a great American who is the senior enlisted man, command of the senior enlisted leader in the Space Force. And he's involved in a controversy, and we want to talk about it respectful of his service and his integrity and his extreme character, it's very good. But Salena Zito, he's in a controversy that needs to be honestly discussed because he may have crossed a line that ought not to be crossed. Tell us about it and welcome. Good Monday to you.
Good Monday morning to you as well. Yes, this has nothing to do with his service, but it has to do with crossing the line, as you said, into politics. Now, Americans have always understood that the military is always going to be political, and politics is always going to have a large imprint on it. But the military itself has always been nonpartisan. In other words, they don't choose a side, and certainly they do not choose a side and then use another side to make a point with a civilian. One of the most cherished and important relationships in our country is that civilian-military relationship. And you and I are old enough to remember that was, at a very low point after and during Vietnam. It wasn't until Ronald Reagan that it started to get better, and it now enjoys the highest positive relationship between a civilian and any institution. Nonetheless, he decided to voice his opinion, and it's not that he shouldn't voice his opinion as a person, but out of his Twitter account using a video against a civilian, and that's when things got dodgy.
Yeah, no, I want to preface this by saying I am a civilian. I haven't served a day in uniform. I do have a son, a son-in-law, and a nephew on active duty. I've got a father, a father-in-law, and a brother-in-law who are veterans of every war that we've been in since World War II. And so I'm aware of the military life, but I have not lived it. And I would never for a moment say that military people may not have political opinions. It's just that they have to be very careful, as my family always has been, to separate their political opinions from the opinions of the military. I believe your criticism is that line was blurred in the Master Sergeant in Gunny's comments.
Yes, absolutely. And that's not a good thing. I mean, the thing, what he said that really I thought was incredibly chilling was after his criticism of the civilian, he then went on to say, quote, and this person has never served a day in the military, end quote. Yet not most people have in this country. Less than 0.5% have served in the military. So you can't make that criticism as a member of the military because most of your citizens have not served, and that is not a good thing. That can be dangerous. And when you break one norm, that's not going to make a crisis. However, when we ignore broken norms, even one, that's when all of a sudden that broken norm now becomes okay to do.
That's why I'd almost like to thank Master Gunnery Sergeant Stalker for raising the issue. This issue came up, if you recall, during the invasion of Iraq. Secretary Rumsfeld couldn't be bothered to issue regulations about Twitter. He told me on the show he's running a war. He didn't have time to worry about this newfangled thing called Twitter and social media. But it is a new world, and they do have to work out new norms, and those norms at best be developed slowly, I think, Salena. And your column makes that point very well. Yes,
that's exactly my point. There has to be a sit down, and look, I think that Secretary Lloyd Austin will probably deal with this once he gets back. He made a surprise visit to Afghanistan yesterday, and I suspect this is not going to be something that he's going to let go by the wayside. He has been excruciatingly nonpartisan throughout his entire career. and something that has always been incredibly important to him. I've interviewed him over a half a dozen times. So I suspect that we will see that from him. And I also suspect it's not going to...
on what occasions did you... I've never interviewed Austin. When did you talk with then General, now Secretary Austin, Salena?
From 2008, and I interviewed him actually last year as well.
Well, that's a terrific advantage over people. Salena works her job, friends. That's why you got to subscribe to SalenaZito.com. That's where everything she writes is found. SalenaZito.com. For a Yinzer, she's awfully smart. Salena, thank you for coming on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Talk to you again next week. Don't go anywhere, America. It is the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Food for the Poor.
Trending now on the Charlie Kirk Show.
They don't think that America has the qualification to speak to China from a position of strength. Cut 91.
Well, I think we thought too well of the United States. We thought that the U.S. side will follow the necessary diplomatic protocols. So for China, it was necessary that we make our position clear. So let me say here that in front of the Chinese side, the United States does not have the qualification to say that it wants to speak to China from a position of strength.
You understand what they're saying here? They're saying that, the United States doesn't have a position of strength. You mean after you destroyed our manufacturing base, debased our currency, spied on our cyber grid, they're lecturing us about strength. In one sense, they're right, but the fact that they have the cockiness to say that goes to show exactly where the international order is headed. And I'm going to tell you one thing that we should all be talking about when it comes to Joe Biden and China that we just seem to be forgetting and missing.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
The world shaped by reading the Washington Post, watching CNN, reading the New York Times is not only a world of different opinion, it is a world of different apprehension of reality. They admit that. It's one of the few things left and right agree with. We do not even agree on reality. It's very tough to dialogue with people. They would admit this. How do you dialogue with people who have a different reality? One of us lives in a fantasy land, either conservatives or leftists. That is one of the few things they can agree on. Right? Right. One 8 Prager 776. There is a piece. I want to get this. I actually contributed to her FundMe page. Gateway Pundit and other places, but the left won't report this. I bet. I couldn't find one left-wing source. If this article is accurate, that's why you didn't send it to me. However, so I checked. It's widely reported, and the names, there are names, and it's a doctor. That's the reason I give it credibility. I want to say at the outset, if what I'm about to read you is not accurate, I am at fault for reporting it, and all the places that reported it, including a place you respect, Gateway Pundit. But they give the school name, they give the doctor's name. I mean, that's a lot.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
I mean, we know that the Media Research Center did polling and found out among people who voted for Joe Biden, something like 30%, didn't know the Hunter Biden story. And those that heard about the Hunter Biden story said up to 17% of them would not have voted for Joe Biden if they had known. This we know for sure. This isn't any kind of conspiracy theory. We know that journalists interfered with this election in a way that journalists have never interfered with an election in the United States before, by suppressing very pertinent information. And for your listeners and your viewers, what is that pertinent information? And it's almost like a joke, actually, Eric. And I think this film, actually, funny enough, will be funny and awfully sad and tragic and has a terrible punch in it. But here's some of the details. Here's a guy with a drug problem. And we're Irish. We exported alcoholism around the world. We're quite sympathetic to people with addiction issues. But here's a guy with a very serious addiction issue. He goes to the Navy, he gets a special dispensation to go to the Navy as an older guy. First day he's there, he's thrown out because he got cocaine in his system. And his story, his excuse for that, is so ludicrous, it's worth telling. He says that he stopped off at a bar because he wanted a glass of water. He decided he needed a cigarette, went outside, didn't have a cigarette, and just randomly, because you know how this is, 2 South African guys offered him a cigarette laced with cocaine. Because you probably know, you live in New York, you see, Eric, you'd know how much these cocaine dealers are just handing out that cocaine for free to everyone.
Yeah, they hand it out for free. That's how I got addicted.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
I just get tired of people blaming racism for any time there's statistical differences along race and ethnicity. And you brought up the case in point about the NBA and NFL. We as Black people were overly represented in these areas, and yet we never hear boo that that's racist. But everywhere else, we scream racism, and I just wish that we would just go a little bit deeper in the analysis whenever we see these things. What is it in the culture? What is it in the way that we're bringing up our children in society that's promoting people to go into certain areas and occupations like that I feel would be much more useful and helpful rather than just saying, oh, racial inequity or racism. I'm saying this as a Black woman. I attended Ivy League schools, and I always felt in the back of my mind, are you judging me because you think I'm here and I didn't deserve it? Whenever we do that and we eliminate merit-based systems, it always makes those of us who are trying to work hard feel like people are judging us as if we didn't work hard to get here.
Well, Bonnie,
thank you, Larry.
Bonnie, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. I went to an Ivy League school, too. My girlfriend was a dancer. She tried out to be a cheerleader, and she didn't make it. And I went to a game, I think one game, and all the cheerleaders were Black, even though virtually all the players were white. Merit-based, these white girls, she told me, just couldn't do the steps they were doing. But nobody complained. Nobody said we ought to have a race-based determination for cheerleaders. We have more white ones.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
Listen, I fight hard for what I believe in every day, but I also try to understand where somebody who disagrees with my ideology or my politics, where they're coming from. And so in a way, maybe you do the same thing, and it kind of keeps us sort of out of the hot seat where we're not just trying to lob, hand grenades to the other side, but we're trying to have a reasonable dialogue.
Yeah, I don't want any vitriol in my life. I work very hard to avoid it. One of the things I talk about my dog a lot, Jasper. I have actually utilized my love for dogs to form relationships with people that I might disagree with politically. And that's been very gratifying, actually. I have a rule, no politics at the dog park. And also I've found the other thing is that if you ask questions, right, I ask a lot of questions. I'm curious. I love learning. I know you do too. This is why you do this job. You love meeting people and learning the issues. And I've also started listening to more podcasts. I'm thrilled that you're going to be doing a podcast. I will subscribe. I will give you 5 stars.
Thank you.
And in the book, I list.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt. And to all of my 400 affiliates out there, if you haven't listened before, Jake Sherman joins me most Mondays. He's the editor-in-chief of Punchbowl News. Punchbowlnews.com is where you get his morning email. You can sign up for it. It's absolutely free. I read it every morning. Jake, I have a theory for you. Good morning, good Monday to you. My theory is this. The presidency is not making news on the weekend anymore. And as a result, all of news has to adjust. We are, I used to not have to do much show prep because President Trump would tweet out a couple of times a show and then the show would turn around. Now it's different. We're back to the old model. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. And that's a welcome thing for people who like weekends. But yeah, no, it's totally quiet. And yeah, everything has to adjust.
Now, and I came to that conclusion reading your assessment this morning of where Mitch McConnell stands vis-a-vis Chuck Schumer. That's the kind of 30,000-foot piece that you just wouldn't have time to do if you had 4 tweets over the weekend.
That's probably right. And we're also trying to not kind of chase shiny objects and to give some context and to fill what we think is a void in the marketplace. So I would say that's probably why we do stuff like that. But yeah, that probably would not be operable or possible if it weren't for Joe Biden not making news on a weekend.
Now, I have not covered this morning because it's not really news. The president's triple stumble. He tried the triple axle on Air Force One. I'm terrible on stairs, so I'm the last guy. Tom Cotton saw me do a faceplant once. I'm the last guy to criticize anyone for being clumsy. Is it a problem for him if it happens twice?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think people will just start asking questions, but, I don't know. I think I thought people made too much of it when Trump fell or when Trump walked slowly at West Point. And I mean, listen, let's be clear with each other here, right? These are people who are up there in years, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Obviously, Donald Trump did not fall walking up the stairs of Air Force One, but these are people who are in their mid to upper 70s, and that happens, I guess. I mean, I don't know what else to make of it besides that.
Now, the biggest story of the weekend actually happened on Thursday, but details arrived on Friday and Saturday. And I just got done spending most of the last hour discussing it with Josh Rogan of the Washington Post. It was the meeting between Secretary of State Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and their Chinese counterparts in Alaska. It was an insult fest. It was really a throwdown, sort of a world wrestling event. What did you make of that?
I thought they were both playing to domestic audiences and international audiences as well. And I thought, and Josh obviously has written a book recently about China, so he would have, and I'm sure you talked about that, he would have a much better sense than I would. But, listen, I think that this administration is trying to break with what it saw as a bad relationship with China or a not fruitful relationship with China under Trump, and is trying to do things differently. And I thought that was the case. I mean, listen, the Chinese foreign minister, or the equivalent, who was speaking in Chinese, obviously, is a fluent English speaker. So he understood everything, all of the nuances and everything that Blinken was saying. So I think that's the case. I think it was generally speaking, a show, but isn't all diplomacy a show in some way, shape, or form?
It is. Sometimes it's intended to accomplish. This was intended to posture. Josh, you're going to be the first guest of many that I ask. Have you read Josh Rogan's Chaos Under Heaven yet?
I've not, but I intend to.
It's a must read. I actually think it's the 4th important book on China in 10 years. Kissinger's on China. Graham Allison's The Thucydides Trap, and Michael Pillsbury, The 100-Year Marathon. Now we have Josh Rogan's Chaos Under Heaven. It's very rare. You guys wrote a good book on the Hill. It's rare when a reporter goes out and actually finds time. I mean, I don't know where you people find time to write books.
nighttime and weekends is when we did it. And also, and Josh's is a lot more, and I haven't read it, but I intend to. Josh's is a lot more research heavy than ours. Ours was accomplished alongside our day job because much of it had to do with what we do during the day, so that makes ours a little bit easier. But it's very impressive to be able to do a research-heavy book while having a day job.
With a point of view and a historical grasp. Now let me move on to the money that's going to the governors. This is, to me, the potential trap. I'll be writing about this for the Post this week. Governors are getting, Larry Hogan's getting $4 billion. California's getting $8 billion, something like that. Governors, it's unclear to me what the spending mechanism is. Do you know if that money has to go through a legislative process or if it's a grant to the executive?
You're talking about the money from the federal government?
Correct.
Yeah, no, it's mostly in grants. I mean, it's structured in different ways. It does not have to go through the legislative. And this is kind of the bet that I think a lot of Democrats are making, which is free money is popular. I mean, and it doesn't happen too often. We've been in kind of a free money whirlwind for the last 6 or 8 months to states. But listen, I think a lot of Republicans and frankly some Democrats privately suggest, why are we doing this? States like California, their revenue is up. They're in a better position than they were before. Why are we giving them money? Now, the politics of this for Democrats, they needed to give them money. They've been promising this for 6 months. Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump and Mark Meadows were against it at the end of the administration. So this is something that we saw coming far down the pike. And I assume you think it's a bad idea, and I think politically it's a boon for those governors.
No, I don't. I believe in. I served on a public health board for 17 years in Orange County that got unstringed money from something called Prop 10 for many years, about $40 million a year. And if you spend it wisely, if you save it and spend the interest, it's very, very good. But I see Portland, Oregon is getting $252 million. All right. What does Portland do with $252 million? Seattle is going to get $97 million. These are, San Francisco is getting $516 million. If it's just going to the mayor, they can solve their homeless problem. They can give the police raises. They can buy armored vehicles. It's completely up to them. And this is where their cylindro will come. This is where their nightmare, some of these Democratic, they're going to spend it on critical race theory seminars. It's going to be badly spent, Jake, because there's no oversight. Am I right about that?
Well, if there's no oversight, it will be badly spent. I think that there is oversight. I think that the board hasn't been constituted yet, but I believe there should be oversight. And I don't think that you're going to see a lot of systemic ills in cities are not going to be solved from this, I'm afraid. I think that's just the reality of this, because frankly, there, as you noted, it's not a legislature that's voting on it. It's an executive that's putting out the money and deciding where it goes. So yeah, in that sense, I understand where you're coming from, that it is a tricky political problem for executives around the country.
Let me tell you the last one. Bill de Blasio is going to get $2.4 billion. His housing authority gets $2.3. His social services department gets $875 million. Bill de Blasio is in charge of $2.4 billion. That is scary to me.
And he's also not up for re-election. So I understand where you're coming from in this case. I mean, there's no check at all on that, and I think that's where it gets tricky for states and localities. But I mean, listen, there is no doubt that there have been facets, there have been pockets of government, some governments around the country, municipalities and states and localities, that need the money. There is no question about that, but how it's spent is obviously a tricky issue.
Yeah, well, the very smart thing, and I go back to my own experience when we got this bucket of money from Prop 10, is we banked it for 3 years and then we only spent the interest. If Bill de Blasio takes $2.4 billion and says we're banking it and we'll spend 4% a year, that becomes an innovation fund, a renewal fund. It would just work, but we'll see. Jake Sherman, I know you'll be reporting on it. Punchbowl News America. Go to punchbowlnews.com, get his morning newsletter. It's terrific stuff. Thank you, Jake. Let me remind everyone, relieffactor.com. I'll take it at the bottom of this hour. I didn't take it last hour because I had Josh Rogan on talking about his brand new book, Chaos Under Heaven, and I didn't want to, I actually forgot. I thought I taped it and I didn't. So I'm giving them an extra pop right now. I will take it when I'm talking to Dr. Fauci, who's coming up at the bottom of the hour. But relieffactor.com does work. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, 4 natural supplements that work with the anti-inflammatory natural immune system to keep down inflammation after your exercise as you get older, and that's the secret to feeling better. Go and take it today. I did my 10 on Saturday. Then I got round 2 of the vaccine. Knocked me on my back for 15 hours. More on that when I come back. America, it's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
I just get tired of people blaming racism for any time there's statistical differences along race and ethnicity. And you brought up the case in point about the NBA and NFL. We as Black people were overly represented in these areas, and yet we never hear boo that that's racist. But everywhere else, we scream racism, and I just wish that we would just go a little bit deeper in the analysis whenever we see these things. What is it in the culture? What is it in the way that we're bringing up our children in society that's promoting people to go into certain areas and occupations like that I feel would be much more useful and helpful rather than just saying, oh, racial inequity or racism. I'm saying this as a Black woman. I attended Ivy League schools, and I always felt in the back of my mind, are you judging me because you think I'm here and I didn't deserve it? Whenever we do that and we eliminate merit-based systems, it always makes those of us who are trying to work hard feel like people are judging us as if we didn't work hard to get here.
Well, Bonnie,
thank you, Larry.
Bonnie, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. I went to an Ivy League school, too. My girlfriend was a dancer. She tried out to be a cheerleader, and she didn't make it. And I went to a game, I think one game, and all the cheerleaders were Black, even though virtually all the players were white. Merit-based, these white girls, she told me, just couldn't do the steps they were doing. But nobody complained. Nobody said we ought to have a race-based determination for cheerleaders. We have more white ones.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Listen, I fight hard for what I believe in every day, but I also try to understand where somebody who disagrees with my ideology or my politics, where they're coming from. And so in a way, maybe you do the same thing, and it kind of keeps us sort of out of the hot seat where we're not just trying to lob, hand grenades to the other side, but we're trying to have a reasonable dialogue.
Yeah, I don't want any vitriol in my life. I work very hard to avoid it. One of the things I talk about my dog a lot, Jasper. I have actually utilized my love for dogs to form relationships with people that I might disagree with politically. And that's been very gratifying, actually. I have a rule, no politics at the dog park. And also I've found the other thing is that if you ask questions, right, I ask a lot of questions. I'm curious. I love learning. I know you do too. This is why you do this job. You love meeting people and learning the issues. And I've also started listening to more podcasts. I'm thrilled that you're going to be doing a podcast. I will subscribe. I will give you 5 stars.
Thank you.
And in the book, I list several podcasts for young people to keep learning.
Yeah.
So that they can grow. I mean, there's a lot of ambition and talent and educated people in America. They want to succeed, but they got to work a little harder to get it. You got to work in a competitive world, and you have to find a way to be different from your competitors.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. Have you ever thought about the barricades of heaven? One of my favorite Jackson Browne stories. Getting through those barricades will be assisted greatly by your generosity to the lost and the least. That which you do to the least of these, you have done for me. We are entering the final days of my campaign to help Food for the Poor rush life-saving food to hungry children in Central America. I'm humbled and gratified that many thousands of you have already helped by going to hughhewitt.com and clicking on the Food for the Poor banner at the very top of the website to donate. Some of you have given $10 and it hurt. Some of you have given $1,000. Some of you have given $10,000. I don't care. I love that thousands of you give. I really do. And I've said from day one, it's not the size of the gift that matters, only that you show that you care. It's the widow's mite for the Christians in the crowd. And this voicemail that we received from a teenager named Sarah says it even better than I can.
I really admire your work with Food for the Poor each year. And I'm 16 years old. I live at home, so I don't really make a whole lot of money. But I have an envelope that I keep on my nightstand, and each time I do get some money, I put a little bit away. It's for Food for the Poor. This year I saved up $80 to give, and I'm not saying any of this to brag. I just wanted to encourage your listeners who probably make more money than I do. And if you can just spare a little bit, that would be good. Bye.
Sarah, you are amazing. You're inspiring. Just a little. Her babysitting money of $80 will feed 2 desperately hungry children in Honduras for 6 months. $80 of rice and beans goes a long way to saving children from, if not outright starvation, then certainly long-term effects of malnutrition. You can join Sarah and thousands of my listeners with $80, with $800, with $8, whatever you can do. A one-time gift of as little as $37 feeds a child for 6 months. Call 855-359-4673. 855-359-HOPE, or what I prefer is you go to hughhewitt.com. And my new audiences out there, Food for the Poor is the real deal. They are not a pop-up scam. They are not one of these packs that show up and take your money and spend it on themselves. No, they're the real deal. They are the poor of heart, the poor of spirit, and the actually poor, but they get it done. Let me switch over to the market, please. Brought to you by Birch Gold. I always tell you Birch Gold has more than 10,000 customers. That's because people buy gold for a lot of reasons. I buy it for the safety deposit box. I buy it from Birch Gold. I do not have any of it in my IRA. I invest in stocks in my IRA. I put the gold in my safety deposit box. Some people do it the opposite way. Birch Gold will send you an information kit on rolling over 10% or more of your IRA. I say 10% is a good enough diversification. Some people want more in physical precious metals. And Birch Gold has the vault. They put your name on it. They send you the reports. They're very, very secure. Or they'll just sell you the Maple Leafs. They'll sell you the Krugerrands, the American Eagles. Hugh Hewitt's advice: don't buy precious, don't buy numismatics. You have no idea what you're doing unless you're a numismatic collector. That's for suckers. I say buy bullion, buy Krugerrands, buy Eagles, or buy them in your 401k. Gold is down this morning a little bit. It's $17.35 an ounce. And overseas, it's a mixed day, with markets up in England and Germany and down in Japan and Hong Kong. The 10-year Treasury, thank goodness, is stable over the weekend, which means we're not going to have any more interest rates panic. So it's a good time to head over to Birch Gold. And the best way to do that is by going to hughgold.com, hughgold.com, or by texting my name, Hugh, to 474747. That's hughgold.com, or text Hugh to 474747. And can I give you a tip? You want to laugh? Go watch the movie Church People at Salem Now. It's a great film. It's a funny film. Youth pastors find themselves in a lot of funny situations, and they get thrown a lot of bad ideas. And this just illustrates Church People. It'll have you laughing you out loud while ultimately reminding you of the true meaning of the gospel. Church People available at salemnow.com. Use my name, Hugh. When you order it, you'll get some off. I think Mike Lindell funded part of this, but he's funded a good comedy. It's a good comedy. Head over and watch Church People Use my name, Hugh, at salemnow.com. Stay tuned. Tony Fauci is next on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
What is the reality for you and your deputies when it comes to the last 58 days in America? Have things changed for you when it comes to illegal migration in your county, Sheriff?
Oh, absolutely. And it's been a disastrous change. It is not a change that we welcomed or are enjoying, that's for sure. You know, immediately overnight, we started having, the last 2 months we've had 40-plus pursuits where they end in a bailout, which means that they run from us, they stop, everybody bails out of the vehicle into the desert. Typically, they'll leave somebody behind. Like we had one where 12 people bailed out of the car and they left a 16-year-old Guatemalan girl behind because they know that we're going to have to deal with this unaccompanied minor while all of them go free into this country. Last Wednesday alone, we had 49 apprehensions in one day. It's not uncommon for us to go out and have 20 apprehensions. And mind you, I'm 60 miles off the border. That's how far they're infiltrating into our country. Camouflage clothes. They don't want to be caught. And here's what I know I'm kind of running on, and I'll give you a second.
No. We need to know. Our listeners, our viewers need to know. So you tell us what's changed.
You know, and what I keep telling people, this isn't about immigration anymore. This is about human trafficking and drug trafficking into this country. And if you care about human beings, it shouldn't matter what party you are. If you care about protecting those people, then you should absolutely care about border security, because the cartel is using these people as to gain money. They're raping the women. They're using the children as pawns, which is clear as day right now, and they extort the men.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
I just got an email about someone who says they have to take mandated racial diversity seminar training or whatever it is. And all I have to say is that there is a piece of art, and I don't use that word lightly, that is so perfect, so funny, so politically incorrect, that hits this perfectly. It's from the legendary show The Office. Now, The Office started as an unbelievably politically incorrect show, and then it got into this kind of like quasi-woke thing later on. But the episode Diversity Day with Steve Carell, it's so politically incorrect, especially in today's time. I'm just going to tell you something right now. If I dared repeat some of the lines here, it wouldn't even be an advertiser boycott. I'd be an advertiser invasion. One of my favorite lines is Steve Carell looks into actually, this might be the pilot episode. You see, I'm not an expert in a lot of things, but I am an expert in the central canon of the first season of The Office, because it all went downhill from there. I watched the later. The first season of The Office is so well written, as if they don't care about, they just said, we are going to swing for the fences, bottom of the ninth, we want this show to catch on, that they just took huge risks. And Steve Carell famously said, as Abraham Lincoln said, if you are a racist, I will attack you from the north. I highly encourage you to check it out, because we need to laugh about this stuff a little bit, because people are emailing me, Charlie, what do I do about this diversity seminar? If you think you have it bad, check out Michael Scott, who had to take the diversity class seminar.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Dennis Prager Show.
It is not normal, and my best argument is we all fantasize. And I'm not speaking about the erotic. I'm speaking about fantasizing other things. So we all fantasize something that would just change a lot. I have one. Here's a fantasy. That there were as many ads telling people not to wear masks outside as there were telling them to wear it outside. But no, I'll bet you no billboard company would put it up. Right? I mean, what if we just quoted from scientific literature, masks outdoors are generally useless?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Pull up Dr. Fauci a little bit and then come closer. So I'm going to fix it for later today.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show today. I'm glad to welcome back Dr. Tony Fauci. Good morning, Dr. Fauci. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. How you doing?
I'm great. I want to dive first into the science, Doctor. Variants. When will you expect to reach stability with the virus? Meaning that you are sure it cannot evolve into something more deadly or more contagious or more evasive than the current vaccines can cope with?
You know, Hugh, you'll never reach that as long as there's virus circulating in the community. Viruses don't mutate unless they replicate. If you prevent their replication by suppressing the spread in the community, at that point, you'll reach the area where you're talking about, where it's not going to change any. But as long as there's, like right now, we have in our own country about 50,000 new infections each day. With that much viral dynamics going on, there's always the threat and the reality of the evolution of variants. So the best way to stop this is to just suppress the virus to a very, very low level.
Now, Doctor, I don't think people talk about worst case scenarios much, probably because there's not much upside in scaring people, but I believe in transparency. The book, The Great Influenza, pointed out to me, and I didn't know this, that the 1918 influenza went through 12 iterations in the summer of 18, but it actually got started in 17. When will we be, do you think will be past a danger point in the virus's ability to go very bad for very many people?
Yeah, great question, Hugh. And that's the reason why we often say a global pandemic requires a global response, because even if we, and I believe we will, within quite a reasonable period of time, suppress the virus in this country and in places in the developed world, the European Union, Canada, Australia, etc., where there's the resources to vaccinate essentially the entire population, then you could get good suppression and feel comfortable. However, as long as there's virus replicating in a robust way anywhere in the world, there's always the danger that mutants and variants will evolve and ultimately get back to whatever country successfully suppressed it. So that's the reason why you're hearing a lot about a global effort to suppress this, because we've got to suppress it throughout the entire world. Because if you're doing fine in this country, and then there are regions of the world where there's outbreaks, the virus is going to continue to mutate. And ultimately, because of the extraordinary extensive travel we have throughout the world, it's ultimately going to get back to the countries that suppressed it. So that's the reason why we should have a commitment, and we do, through a number of mechanisms, including COVAX, to make sure that virtually all the countries in the world will have the capability of suppressing it.
So, Dr. Fauci, what happened in 1918 when it eventually went away? Even though we didn't have the vaccine, we never got a vaccine for 1918, but it eventually faded away, even though it circulated around the world. What happened there that we can't rely on happening here?
Well, the only trouble with that, Hugh, is that it killed between 50 and 100 million people worldwide in a population that was 1/3 the size of the global population now, which means that would be equivalent to killing between 150 and 300 million people. So when you just ravage the world like that, after a while, you run out of susceptible hosts, you get herd immunity, and that's it. We don't want to go there. We want to stop it before it does that kind of devastation, which is the reason why the answer is the proper implementation of vaccines.
Now, so, Doctor, is it still a possibility that such a ravaging could occur? I believe it is, but I'm not a scientist. I just talked to my official toxicologist, who's a relative, who says, you can't rule it out. I don't know if it's 5 or 10%, but you can't rule it out. Can you rule it out?
You know, you never could rule those things out, but the likelihood of that happening is extraordinarily low, given the fact that we have multiple highly efficacious vaccines. So, I mean, right now, for example, we've vaccinated completely about 13 or more, 14% of the population, and even maybe 24% have at least one dose. By the time we get into the late spring and early summer, we're going to have a lot more people vaccinated. So I think the likelihood of the scenario that you're pointing out, Hugh, is going to be extremely unlikely.
Good. Is there any evidence that it's become, any of the variants that we know of yet have become more dangerous for children than the original or the variants?
There is a suggestion that one of them is easily infecting children, which means, children still, on the whole, do much, much better than adults. If you look at the rate of hospitalizations per 100,000 people, and you look at those charts, children are way, way off on the side of the chart where there's very little hospitalization. But some of the variants, if they have the capability of infecting children more readily, you're ultimately going to see more serious disease in children.
Now, Doctor, I asked a few of my friends, I said, Dr. Fauci's coming back on Monday. What are your best questions? Great question from a friend who had been part of the thousands of Americans who stepped forward for the trials, did the Moderna trial, got successfully vaccinated. He is wondering, when does he have to get revaccinated? When does the trial people were first in line, they're 6 months into it. Do you have any idea yet when they've got to get a booster shot?
No, we don't. And that's the reason why we observe people for up to 2 years or even longer following vaccination. Right now, we know things look good at least up to 6 months and likely much longer. But the only way you know is you've got to follow people and find out when that level of antibody falls below a certain level and people start getting infected again. So that's one of the things you only learn by observation, Hugh.
And is the effort in place to observe enough people to come to a reliable conclusion, Doctor? Okay.
Yeah.
Emily Oster, an economist at Brown, wrote a piece in The Atlantic last week, which you probably read, Dr. Fauci, you read everything. The science on transmission by the vaccinated is still hazy. I received my second dose on Saturday. Can I transmit the virus?
Well, whoever asked that question it's a good question. Right now, we haven't ruled out completely that even though you are, and I'm like you, Hugh, I'm vaccinated also, about whether or not if we get exposed, we could get infected and have no symptoms because we're vaccinated. And if there's enough virus in our nasopharynx, theoretically, we could infect someone else, which is the reason why we ask people to continue to wear masks. Having said that, as the weeks and months go by, more and more papers are coming out saying that the likelihood of transmitting from a vaccinated person gets lower and lower because some studies are looking at the level of virus in the nasopharynx, and it's either absent or very, very low. I would predict, though you just got to be careful with predictions, that after several more months, Hugh, we're going to get enough data to say that the likelihood of transmitting an infection from an asymptomatic vaccinated person is extremely low.
That will be good news. Now I want to talk, my toxicologist asked me to ask you about therapies other than vaccine, pointing out that Lilly has a combo therapy that's been approved for reuse. Regeneron has a cocktail that reduces the viral load, the time to alleviate symptoms. Do you think that we're selling those therapies hard enough for the anti-vaxxer crowd and for people generally to know about, that they can ask them and then they are available enough to even tell people about them?
The answer is there's not a big supply of them, number one. Number two, one of the constraints of that approach, Hugh, is that it's got to be given intravenously. which means you got to have an infusion center or get somebody into a clinic or a hospital. That has been the logistic reason why it has not been widely used. The other thing we know from the clinical trials is that if you wait a bit until the disease progresses somewhat, the monoclonal antibodies don't work very well at all. They work really well if you get people early. And early means symptoms that are not yet severe enough to get you into the hospital. Once you get advanced symptomatology requiring hospital intervention, the likelihood of a monoclonal antibody being effective is less than when you give it early in the course of disease.
Let me set this next question up neutrally because I have been deluged with information about ivermectin. I was in fact prescribed ivermectin a few months ago by my internist, who has been my internist for 20 years when I was exposed, quite definitely. I didn't develop it. Doesn't mean that the ivermectin worked. What's your opinion, Dr. Fauci?
The answer is, Hugh, we don't know. I mean, there have been a number of studies that have not really been well done in the sense of the classical randomized placebo-controlled trial. So that question is still open. We don't know the answer to that. Some studies now are looking at it to determine if it is. You know, we used to think people were claiming that colchicine worked also. There have been a couple of studies now that I think have closed the book on that it looks like it doesn't. But I think the situation with ivermectin, still no evidence that I'm convinced that it works. But again, not any evidence to convince that it doesn't work. So studies are still going on.
And my doctor said, we know it can't hurt you. Is that your opinion as well? So,
I mean, it's a drug that has very few serious toxicities.
All right. Do you trust the Russian and or the Chinese vaccine to be efficacious?
You know, I'm assuming that they are. I mean, certainly the data on the Russian vaccine, I've taken a look at some of the reports. It looks pretty good. The Chinese one very well might be good. I haven't had the opportunity to examine the data to the extent that I would feel comfortable. But the Russian one, I believe, is quite effective.
Well, that's interesting. Now, the Wall Street Journal on Friday, Doctor, reported that China resisted international pressure for an investigation it saw as an attempt to assign blame, delayed the probe for months, secured veto rights over participants, and insisted its scope encompass other countries as well, the journal found. If the Chinese can exercise that kind of authority over the WHO, is the WHO efficacious for determining the origins?
Well, again, Hugh, a good question. And that's one of the reasons why when we went back into WHO, I had the opportunity, as you might recall, on the first day of President Biden's tenure as president, he had asked me to address the executive board of WHO and announce we're coming back in and we're going to resume our responsibilities regarding support. But one of the important points in my statement was that we were very serious about reforms of WHO. So we want to get back in. We feel that it is a necessary organization. The world needs a WHO, but they do need reforms. And the reforms relate to what you just said, that there cannot be undue influence by any country on decisions of WHO. It's got to be based purely on considerations of global health.
Now, I know you're not an international investigator, but from what you've read, do you believe that the People's Republic of China presently has undue influence over the WHO?
You know, I don't think as much as people are saying, Hugh. I mean, there's a big story. People talk about that, but I don't believe that that's the case. It may have been in the beginning, but I don't see that right now.
All right. A vaccine skeptic, another one of my colleagues, David Drucker of the Washington Examiner. A vaccine skeptic tells you, Dr. Fauci, quote, "What's the point? Since you're saying I still have to wear a mask indefinitely and I can't immediately go back to living a normal life, what is the point of getting a vaccine?"
Well, first of all, I have never said to you that you have to wear a mask indefinitely. I did not say, I never said that. I said that after you're vaccinated, until we prove, apropos of your good question a few minutes ago, that there's no virus in a person's nasopharynx who's been vaccinated, until then, that's why we're suggesting wearing a mask. I never said we should wear it indefinitely for sure. And the reason you get vaccinated is to save your life because
That's
you may be in a situation. I mean, that's a really good reason.
Yeah, well, that's what I think too. Why bother not harming? Now, you have a media strategy, doctor, and I don't know who sets it up for you, heavily weighted to the traditionally elite outlets, Meet the Press, of which I'm a member, and CBS and NBC. Have you appeared on Newsmax yet? Have you appeared on Dennis Prager's show? Do you avoid the places where there might be more contention, but also a different audience?
No, I don't, Hugh, at all. Seriously, I mean, I say yes to a wide variety of requests. I've been on Fox multiple times. I mean, so I don't shy away from that. No.
All right. Lessons from the pandemic that will prevent the next one. When you sit back and you start making the yellow pad notes on how do we prevent, a 100-year event doesn't mean every 100 years. It means once 100 years. It could be next year.
Indeed.
What do we do differently this time?
Well, there's a number of things. First of all, we've got to make sure that we have a good global health security network, that we are interconnected and very transparent in what goes on at any part of the world so that we can actually respond rapidly. Number two, we've got to bolster up our own local public health capability, which really over the years has been, subject to attrition that really was unfortunate, maybe kind of victims of our own success because we've done so well over the years with vaccines and antibiotics, but the local public health response has not been optimal. And we knew that from the situation regarding how we were trying to do identification, isolation, and contact tracing, and we were not really that successful in doing that. The other thing, Hugh, is something that, I know I've spoken about a fair amount. When you're having a common enemy like a virus, you cannot address that in the arena of divisiveness that we've had in this country. Not taking one side or the other, but when you have the kind of divisiveness that we've had in this country over the last year during the outbreak, that's made it very difficult to get a common, unified response against the virus. So, I mean, there are a number of lessons. There are public health lessons, there are scientific lessons, and there are lessons of how we as a nation approach a common enemy, the virus, as opposed to fighting with each other.
And Dr. Fauci, apropos of that, I always tell people, everybody is doing the best that they can, and everybody makes mistakes. Do you agree with me on that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What is the most surprising thing about the disease scientifically? As you study it, and you've been doing this your whole life, what surprised you about this disease?
Yeah, a characteristic of the disease, Hugh, that was unique, puzzling, and then when we really were found out about it, it really changed the approach that we took. And that is, you have a disease that has the capability of already killing 535 or more thousand people in the United States, a deadly disease for people who are susceptible, the elderly and those with underlying conditions. At the same time, about 1/3 to 40% of the people have absolutely no symptoms. We've just never seen anything like that before. Usually when you have a disease that kills these many people, you may have a small fraction of people don't have symptoms, but not 40%. The other thing that has really puzzled us early on, but now we know it very clearly, is that between 50 and 60% of all the transmissions come from someone who has no symptoms. So you get infected from somebody who has no symptoms. Generally, when you have respiratory infections, historically, the outbreaks are driven by people who have symptoms. Occasionally, you get a small percentage of the transmissions are from people with no symptoms. But to have 50 to 60% of all the transmissions coming from someone without symptoms makes it very difficult to really appreciate the under the radar screen spread in the community. And that's where we really got hit badly, because that was going on in our country to a much greater extent before we really fully realized what was going on.
Dr. Fauci, why are obese people so susceptible? I understand heart disease, but I do not understand obesity.
You know, that's a great question. I think it's a couple of things. I think it's the mechanical movement of the diaphragm to expand and contract your lungs. And we know that because people do better when you put them prone as opposed to supine. So one of the things that obese people have, they don't have the capability of easily inhaling and exhaling because of the constraints on their plasticity of the lung. That's one of the things. The other thing I believe is that obese people, particularly morbidly obese people, have a much higher rate of the other underlying comorbidities which get a serious outcome. That's diabetes, hypertension, heart disease. The incidence in a morbidly obese person of those other diseases is much higher than the general population.
Ought we to have begun last year, ought we to begin now, an effort to get people to lose weight?
Yeah, I mean, obesity is an epidemic in this country, Hugh. I mean, that's really one of the unfortunate situations. And there are so many reasons for that, you know, that date back from the time a person is a child, the kind of diet that they get exposed to. That's something, and it's particularly disproportionate in certain demographic groups. I mean, African American and Latinx population clearly, almost certainly related to the lack of accessibility early on when they're children of a completely varied and healthy diet.
Okay, I'm wrapping up, Doctor, because I don't want to take too much of your time. Sunk costs are an economic term. They are very hard for people to deal with. If you're studying the data, have you led to any conclusion on lockdowns? Because we have some states like California that went in hard for lockdowns. They're not doing any better. Indeed, they might be doing worse than Florida, which did not go in for lockdowns at all. So the sunk costs on lockdown are enormous and prevent people from dealing with it objectively. But you understand sunk costs. Did we make mistakes on lockdowns?
You know, Hugh, I don't think so. I think the lockdown situation is really very complicated because there have been some states that said they locked down. And when you look at the actual, you know, tracking them on GPSs about how much they locked down, it isn't nearly as much as was claimed. In fact, they did a comparison of the European lockdown versus the United States lockdown. And they did it by GPS. How many people go to the stores? How many people go to the parks? And when Europe locked down, they locked down a heck of a more strictly than we did.
And it has efficacy. You believe it worked?
Yes, it does. I mean, it has efficacy in suppressing the outbreak, but it also, as you say, and I agree, has significant economic consequences.
All right, two more questions. One's just a historical factor. A new book out by Josh Rogan suggests that in a late January meeting, Pottinger and O'Brien wanted a shutdown of China inbound. You and Mnuchin were opposed to it. Is that correct?
No. I think that simplifies the discussion. So, I mean, I often get that, but people say, I said, no, don't do it. That's not the case. I had brought up the point, historically, when you're trying to shut down a country during an outbreak, sooner or later, it gets spread throughout the world, and you shut down this country and it comes in from another country. I never said I was against shutting down. I was giving a caveat about being careful. If you shut down, as a matter of fact, you may not get the total effect you want. When the president decided that he was going to shut down, I agreed with that at that point. I just gave a caveat about being careful when you do it. But as all of a sudden the history has evolved, everybody says I was against shutting down. I wasn't. I was giving some cautionary warnings about it.
All right. My very last question is high science. It has to do with the Wuhan lab at which this is suspected of escaping. They were doing something called gain of function research. I know you know what that means. It took me a long time to get my lawyer arms around it. Did the NIH support gain of function research? It sounds very dangerous to me.
No, we don't. We have guidelines now that do not support that kind of research in those circumstances. We support some form of gain of function, which is appropriate we did not support gain of function research there.
Do you think that had something to contribute to the? Do you believe in the escape from the lab theory?
No, I mean, I think that, I mean, obviously, Hugh, you can never rule that out completely. I mean, it's just one of those things you can't. But the evidence that of the sequencing of the virus in bats makes it very, very unlikely. They were doing things that were interpreted as being gain of function that I don't think fall under the real strict category of that. But we years ago, Hugh, made a policy that in order to, before you support any gain of function, it's got to go through multiple reviews that go up to the Department of Health and Human Services. So years and years ago, we were supporting among our grantees, mostly in influenza, not in COVID-19, mostly in influenza. But then because of concerns, the constraints that are put on gain of function experiments are really rather stringent.
So an allegation was made that the NIAI had supported the Wuhan lab gain of function research. That's not true?
We supported by a subcontractor. We gave a grant to a person in the United States who subcontracted a collaboration with Wuhan, but that was not gain of function research.
Okay, very important to get that. Okay, I have time for one last question, Doctor. I'm now vaccinated. Can I go see my grandkids?
Yes, as long as your grandkids are healthy and don't have an underlying condition that would make them really seriously at risk if they got infected. If they're healthy young grandkids, you can go see them without a mask in their home. Have fun.
You made my day, Doctor. Thank you for your time. You're always generous. Keep doing the good work.
Thank you, Hugh. Always good to be with you.
Thank you.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Folks, I'm talking to Anne McElhenney and Phelim McAleer. You have a film that you are on the verge of making. It's called My Son Hunter, and it's about Hunter Biden.
When you think about it, this should be the opening skit on every Saturday Night Live.
I was just going to say, precisely, yes.
I mean, and you know, I don't like making fun of alcoholics being Irish, you know, but the politics is so funny. I mean, this guy, as Anne said, you know, thrown out of the Navy, alcoholic, drug addict,
gets a stripper pregnant.
Who hasn't? You know, he goes to rehab, meets a homeless woman on the way into rehab called Bicycles, because she's always got a bicycle, goes off and lives with her for 3 months. This is by his own admission. But the joke, the real joke here is, who did Burisma? They did an international executive search, and who did they decide was the best person for their
on the
board?
planet Earth, after a deep dive, you know, in really checking out all the people available and doing all background checks, this is the one guy you want on your energy board.
He's a crack addict. He's filmed himself in pornographic acts and put it on the web. Jimmy Carter had a brother named Billy who was constantly getting Jimmy Carter in trouble. I remember this as a kid and thinking how embarrassing it would be to have somebody close to you in the family who's saying things and doing things. This is that times a billion. He's compromising. Imagine if Billy Carter had been talking to the Soviets. Imagine if Billy Carter had been doing back deals with the Soviets.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
I am a teacher in an elementary school, and a lot of our professional development is on racism because our school is very diverse in that population. And one of the professional development we had was on diverse books and the lack of diverse books. Mm-hmm. So basically the statistics they gave us was that, this is from 2018, that 50% of all children's books that are published are based on characters who are white. So 50% white, 27% are animals or other things besides people. 10% is based on blacks, 7% on Asian Pacific or Asian people, 5% on Latinos, and then 1% on American Indians. And how this is an example of systemic racism, and it's very hard to find diverse books.
My first thought, Mary, is who sat around and added them all up like that? I mean, that's just amazing to me.
Right?
That's stunning to me. The good book is a good book. A good character is a good character. Huckleberry Finn had all sorts of references and N-words in it, but it was about a bondage between a black man and a young white boy. And it was a wonderful story. How that's become racist is beyond me. The other point I want to make is presumably all of this is to make sure the kids have good self-esteem. As I've said on my program, going back over decades, black kids have higher self-esteem than white kids. Black girls have higher self-esteem than white girls. Black boys have way higher self-esteem than Asian boys and Asian girls. So if this is all about making sure that black boys and black girls have self-esteem, mission accomplished.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
You know how many times he said it now? I think it's 4. I think he has accidentally called his vice president 4 times. What do you think the mainstream news media would be doing if Donald Trump accidentally called Mike Pence President Pence 4 times? They would be a 24-hour vigil for when they were going to put a straitjacket on Trump and take him out of the White House into the local mental institution. But when Joe Biden does it, well, it's Joe Biden. Wait, let me guess. Is it his stutter again? He's got this stutter that everybody says, his defenders say, is the reason he can barely speak in complete paragraphs. He's worried about his stutter. Is that, here it was, cut 1, Joe Biden talking about a vaccination center in Arizona. Listen to how he describes the vice president of the United States.
Now, when President Harris and I took a virtual tour of a vaccination center in Arizona not long ago, one of the nurses on that tour, injecting people, giving vaccinations, said that each shot was like administering a dose of hope.
Yes, dose of hope. We're going to need it because when you watch the news, it sounds like we're all still dropping dead from COVID everywhere.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Jerry Boyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. The Congressional Budget Office just released its new debt figures. The national debt this year will top 102% of GDP. This has only happened twice before, both during World War II. This number does not count the proposed $1.9 trillion stimulus bill, nor does it count the money which was borrowed from Social Security, since that's considered intergovernmental debt. Debt levels this high break the intergenerational covenant that we have with our children and grandchildren. FDR borrowed to defeat the Nazis and Imperial Japan. Money well spent. Reagan borrowed to defeat the Soviet Union. That was also money well spent. These great projects made the world better for future generations. But our political class is not buying victories against international threats. They are buying political victories for incumbents. This is nothing more than fiscal abuse, and our kids will pay the price. It needs to stop now. I'm Jerry Boyer.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
This isn't, as some have portrayed it, as some kind of spontaneous...
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt, and a special greetings to my friend in Clarksburg, West Virginia, listening. I've got your governor, Governor Jim Justice, first time on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Governor, welcome. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you.
Well, Governor, you know, my whenever I have a governor on for the first time, I usually ask them to appoint me to something. Is the position of West Virginia Master of the Horse open?
I don't know. I think that's already taken, but we will find a position. We will find a position immediately.
Okay, I generally just like to have some official. I'm commissioner of hockey in Minnesota, but Master of the Horse appeals to me. Governor, I'm from Ohio, and my good friends from West Virginia drove up there to work in the mills, and they got up to Northeastern. I'm thinking of Ann Gennari and others. Have you stopped losing people to the great state of Ohio?
Well, I do not think we've stopped losing people in population. Period. I mean, we're one of the only we're the only state in the entire country that has lost population since 1950, since 2016. We are absolutely continuing to lose population with all kinds of incredible goodness going on in West Virginia, and that's why we're proposing this elimination of our personal income tax.
Well, you know, the Mountaineers is a heck of a university, a great research center. And if you can get down to Tennessee levels on income tax, you'll start to see big tech come there. Explain to people what you're trying to do, because it's very, very, very aggressively pro-growth.
Well, the bottom line, Hugh, is just this, in the state of West Virginia, you know, and I don't say this braggadociously, I say this, you know, with great honor, but when I walked in the door, I mean, our state was bankrupt. That's all there is to it. And we've got so many good things going right now. We continue to be pitched first in the nation and all the stuff in regard to COVID, and we've done all that. We are turning surplus after surplus now in our state. We're building roads everywhere, and we put a real stake in the sand in regard to education. Now, with all of that, you know, what we need to do now is take this next step forward. And the bottom line of this next step is we've gone through every wage earner's class. Every single wage earner will end up cash positive from this. And even the people that are paying no income tax, we did it with cash rebate checks directly to them in the tune of $52 million. Now, that's on one hand. On the other hand, we know the opportunity. I mean, for crying out loud, we'll grow and grow, where property values will go up, our wages will go up, all kinds of things will start to happen in West Virginia, more and more job opportunity. We know all that. So that's the left hand, cash in the pockets, right hand opportunity. But the big thing, Hugh, that everybody misses here is just one thing. In our state, with a 60% cut in personal income tax, you're going to put $1.087 billion right in the hands of all West Virginians.
Now, Governor, quality of life matters so much to people, and Tennessee and Georgia have really sold that. And of course, Mike DeWine, your buddy, sells living on the lake, and some poor people have to go live in Cincinnati. But what is the quality of life argument for West Virginia?
Well, I mean, Hugh, just think about it. We have 4 of the most incredible seasons on the planet. Quality of life always centers around your kids and schools, and it always centers around roads. And we're dead after that in every way. But, Hugh, I've got to say this last thing. If you put $1.087 billion in the hands of anybody in any state, it will explode to small businesses without one person of growth.
Yep.
So with all we're doing here, West Virginia, Hugh, is becoming the diamond in the rough everybody missed. And it is absolutely a beautiful, beautiful state with incredible people.
Now, Governor, I've got a lot of friends in the Valley who move things like Google to Ann Arbor, and they look around to move Maloof mattresses to Ohio. What is the high-tech center of West Virginia? Where do they find the engineers? Is it Morgantown?
We have now landed Hyperloop. There are so many big high-tech companies looking at us right now. The Hyperloop thing will absolutely drag with it so much innovation that is going to happen kind of in the northern side of the country, but it's between the Panhandle and Morgantown. But they're just, Hugh, it is limitless. That's all there is to it. You know, the people of southern West Virginia have always been the craftsmen. We have just had, you know, the biggest thing we have done is change our image. We were looked at as maybe a dark, backward state and everything, you know, from the dark coal fields and everything. Right now, in West Virginia, and I got to say this last thing, but right now, the amount of dollars we're receiving from severance tax in West Virginia is the lowest percentage in the last 25 years, and it's because we're diversified.
I got to also tell you, and I'm a Republican like you, Governor, your Senator Joe Manchin has done a lot, and Shelley Moore Capito, for the state, because Joe Manchin appears to be thoughtful and principled. I think if he turns around on the filibuster, he'll blow that up. Do you have confidence he'll hold the line on the filibuster, Governor?
You know, I hope so. I really do. You know, I want to be supportive of both of our senators, but I really think if you watch closely, and President Trump probably said it the very best, but his really close personal friend, President Trump, and he said, really, when it really got down to crunch time, Joe always migrated back to the Democrats, and it worries me. It really worries me.
Well, how would that play in West Virginia? If he collapsed the filibuster, what would West Virginia is the most pro-Trump state, the reddest state in the union, actually. I think it's redder than Wyoming.
Well, it surely won't play well, but just think about, you know, our senator is supporting a lady that absolutely is so defiant to fossil fuels, it's unbelievable. There's so many things that are going on. I mean, but you know, I want to be very supportive of both our senators. I absolutely, you know, that's exactly where I want to stand. But it really worries me. Really.
All right, now go back to the taxes with me, Governor. When will your new tax plan take effect?
Well, if I can get it through the legislature, you know, this anytime, Hugh, there's change, you know, people start hesitating and everything else, and then you've got members of the state legislature that think this way, and this is not the right way to think, but they think, you know, well, I'm not for raising any tax anywhere. Well, if you tweak the consumption tax, or you tweak you know, a sales tax or a soda pop tax or whatever, and yet you still come out net really positive dollars, well, for crying out loud, that's what we ought to do. But there's a lot of people that are just dug in and can't stand change. But all that be, it will go in effect next January. It will immediately take everybody, you know, to a 60% cut in their income tax, and then we'll phase out the rest of it with growth. I'd say it'll take 3 years to completely eliminate the income tax in West Virginia, but the way we're growing and the things we're doing, you know, we can get it done.
Now, Governor, you know, I left California 6 years ago for Virginia because of their income tax and their estate tax. What is the estate tax situation in West Virginia?
Well, we follow the federal guidelines in regard to that and everything, and I'm not well versed in everything in regard to the estate tax in West Virginia, but right now, you know, as it's been lowered substantially on the federal basis and everything, we follow that formula.
Last question, Governor. I've got a general manager of my Washington, D.C. affiliate, Northern Virginia. He drives in every day from West Virginia to D.C. Has West Virginia, in part, become a suburb of the Capital Beltway?
Well, surely. And that's why we need you to move over into West Virginia. I mean, you're just throwing money away over there. You just need to drive in and out, too. You know, but without any question, we've got thousands, if not tens and tens and tens of thousands of people that live in West Virginia because they cannot tolerate all the things that are going on in Virginia, and they live in the Eastern Panhandle or wherever it may be and move across, or they live in, you know, the border counties down in southern West Virginia and they drive across. But without any question, you know, we've got a lot of people to do that.
I've got to be able to see professional sports and winning college football, Governor. And you don't have the Buckeyes, and you haven't got the Redskin football team that I can drive up and see the Browns play. But when you get that fixed up, I'll think about it. Good to have you, Governor Justice. Keep coming back. Good luck in getting this passed. It's the way of the future.
Hugh, thank you so much for all you do each and every day. I mean that sincerely. And you know, now we have the pro football, their summer camp in West Virginia, and we're going to work really hard on getting the Mountaineers or somebody to the national championship game.
Well, you're going to have to get past the Buckeyes. When that happens, we may not be able to talk for a while, Governor, but I'm with you on the taxes. Thank you, sir. Governor Jim Justice of West Virginia. Going to find me my job, too, maybe Master of the Horse. Don't go anywhere, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Food for the Poor.
This is Jerry Boyer of Town Hall Finance for townhall.com. The Congressional Budget Office just released its new debt figures. The national debt this year will top 102% of GDP. This has only happened twice before, both during World War II. This number does not count the proposed $1.9 trillion stimulus bill, nor does it count the money which was borrowed from Social Security, since that's considered intergovernmental debt. Debt levels this high break the intergenerational covenant that we have with our children and grandchildren. FDR borrowed to defeat the Nazis and Imperial Japan. Money well spent. Reagan borrowed to defeat the Soviet Union. That was also money well spent. These great projects made the world better for future generations. But our political class is not buying victories against international threats. They are buying political victories for incumbents. This is nothing more than fiscal abuse, and our kids will pay the price. It needs to stop now. I'm Jerry Boyer.
The Pepperdine School of Public Policy, America's unique graduate program for leaders. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
This isn't, as some have portrayed it, as some kind of spontaneous, random, organic response to Joe Biden being president. This is being institutionally organized for the profit of the cartels, correct?
Absolutely. And the cartels understand what our politics and our policies are better than we do as Americans. And they knew where Joe Biden was leaning in his administration, and they were more than willing and more than ready to help accommodate those people to come across this country. Look, they don't just let people come across. On the other side, the cartel is regulated. They make these people pay. They give them children to, hey, here, take this kid across with you. They're less likely to stop you. Or
so this is something that I want everybody to understand. I heard this from my friend, former Commissioner for Customs and Border Protection, Mark Morgan. They are using children from the northern counties in Mexico as props so that groups of adults coming across can say, we are a family unit, so the feds have to treat them differently. Are you confirming that, Sheriff Lamb?
Yes, 100%. And out in Collin County, Texas, one of my other fellow sheriffs out there, they do interdiction on the highways out there. He says no less than 3 to 5 times they have actually pulled cars over where the people in the front had no idea who the children in the back were, and the children in the back had no idea who the people in the front were. They know what our policies are. They're using that against us. They're using children, which is despicable. And honestly, where are these parents of these people?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
They don't think that America has the qualification to speak to China from a position of strength. Cut 91.
外交礼节
Well, I think we thought too well of the United States. We thought that the U.S. side will follow the necessary diplomatic protocols.
所以我们刚才必须阐明我们的立场。
So for China, it was necessary that we make our position clear.
我现在讲一句，你们没有资格在中国的面前说你们从实力的地位出发同中国谈话。
So let me say here that in front of the Chinese side, the United States does not have the qualification to say that it wants to speak to China from a position of strength.
You understand what they're saying here? They're saying that, the United States doesn't have a position of strength. You mean after you destroyed our manufacturing base, debased our currency, spied on our cyber grid, they're lecturing us about strength. In one sense, they're right, but the fact that they have the cockiness to say that goes to show exactly where the international order is headed. And I'm going to tell you one thing that we should all be talking about when it comes to Joe Biden and China.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I need to check the markets. Brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. Big financial story of the day was in the Wall Street Journal. New realtors pile into hot housing market. Most find it tough going. Now, that is always a sign of an extraordinarily hot housing market, is when people pile into it and get their realtor's license and go out there and try and make a living. The best realtors I know, by the way, they are listed like Jonathan Leahy in Washington, D.C., and others across the country. They're always available, and they have worked at it for decades. Decades and decades and decades. And so you got to start somewhere, and young realtors get in, and it's good, but it's usually better to get in a bust, because right now there is a very wildly hot market. Wildly hot. And if you need a realtor who's a good realtor, go to AndrewandTodd.com. They're lenders with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They will lend you the money. Or you can call them at 888-888-1172. It's a very tight lending market, too. Not because you're not qualified, but because the avalanche of applications for these low rates is ongoing. Even though rates have ticked up a little bit, they're still, we were telling stories last night at dinner. I had Rhett Rasmussen and Irene come over for dinner last night. They're the owners of Salena Infrared Grills, good friends of ours. And I can't recommend Salena Infrared Grills better. And we had bought patio heaters from them, and Rhett actually built them for me. Now, that service you're not going to get, because I don't think he trusted me to put them together. I don't know why, but he didn't trust me to do that. Beautiful, wonderful, just bromic outdoor heaters. But then we were sitting down at dinner, the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt's enchiladas, and we talked about our first mortgage. And the first mortgage that the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I had in 1985 was 13.5%. And I got to tell you, that's what you paid in the 80s. Right now, you're paying 2.5% to 3.5%. Don't get left behind. Call AndrewandTodd.com, but then you got to find a house. And the way to find a house is ask them for their realtor list. Go to them and say, hey, you ought to go right now and get the realtor list and get pre-qualified and get a letter and get out there in the market. Now, I got to tell you a quick story. I got the Pfizer vaccine round 2, as did the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt this week. And I got it on Saturday. She got it on Sunday. I got it at 11:30 in the morning. At 12:30 in the morning, I reeled into the bedroom and fell asleep for 15 hours. Hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. Headache. 15 hours later, I was fine. It was a mild flu. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt got it, and like women everywhere, same thing. Fatigue, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, mild flu. But she got up and cooked dinner for the Rasmussens because she's a woman and I'm a baby. I am here to tell you, it's okay. You're not. It's such a mild flu. Get the vaccine. It will save your life. As Dr. Fauci just said, the number one reason if you're skeptical to get the vaccine is it will save your life. I can't repeat this enough. You do not. It's a very bizarre disease. And I spend a lot of time on the phone and in texting with my official toxicologist, who reads as many of the papers as possible, gave me a couple of the questions I asked Dr. Fauci today. It can kill you. All right, just get that through your mind. Most people are not going to die from it. If you get the vaccine, you almost certainly won't die from it. That's the key thing to take away. The Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, I don't know the science on Johnson & Johnson yet, so I'm not going to make a statement about it, but I've read the science on Moderna and Pfizer. If you get the vaccine, even if you get the disease, you are highly unlikely to die. I mean, just, it's not going to happen. And so, please get the vaccine. Do whatever you have to do. By the way, I think CVS gets 5 stars from us. It was effortless. It was easy. It was professional. Go get the vaccine. Go to AndrewandTodd.com. Come right back here. More of the Hugh Hewitt Show straight ahead.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
The world shaped by reading the Washington Post, watching CNN, reading the New York Times is not only a world of different opinion, it is a world of different apprehension of reality. They admit that. It's one of the few things left and right agree with. We do not even agree on reality. It's very tough to dialogue with people. They would admit this. How do you dialogue with people who have a different reality? One of us lives in a fantasy land, either conservatives or leftists. That is one of the few things they can agree on. Right? Right. 1-8-PRAGER-776. There is a piece. I want to get this. I actually contributed to her FundMe page. Gateway Pundit and other places, but the left won't report this, I bet. I couldn't find one left-wing source. If this article is accurate, that's why you didn't send it to me. However, so I checked. It's widely reported, and there are names, and it's a doctor. That's the reason I give it credibility. I want to say at the outset, if what I'm about to read you is not accurate, I am at fault for reporting it, and all the places that reported it, including a place you respect, Gateway Pundit. But they give the school name, they give the doctor's name. I mean, that's a lot.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
I mean, we know that the Media Research Center did polling and found out among people who voted for Joe Biden, something like 30% didn't know the Hunter Biden story. And those that heard about the Hunter Biden story said up to 17% of them would not have voted for Joe Biden if they had known. This we know for sure. This isn't any kind of conspiracy theory. We know that journalists interfered with this election in a way that journalists have never interfered with an election in the United States before, by suppressing very pertinent information. And for your listeners and your viewers, what is that pertinent information? And it's almost like a joke, actually, Eric. And I think this film, actually, funny enough, will be funny and awfully sad and tragic and has a terrible punch in it. But here's some of the details. Here's a guy with a drug problem. And we're Irish. We exported alcoholism around the world. We're quite sympathetic to people with addiction issues. But here's a guy with a very serious addiction issue. He goes to the Navy, he gets a special dispensation to go to the Navy as an older guy. First day he's there, he's thrown out because he got cocaine in his system. And his story, his excuse for that, is so ludicrous, it's worth telling. He says that he stopped off at a bar because he wanted a glass of water. He decided he needed a cigarette, went outside, didn't have a cigarette, and just randomly, because you know how this is, two South African guys offered him a cigarette laced with cocaine. Because you probably know, you live in New York, you see, Eric, you'd know how much these cocaine dealers are just handing out that cocaine for free to everyone.
Yeah, they hand it out for free. That's how I got addicted.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
For any time there's statistical differences along race and ethnicity, and you brought up the case in point about the NBA and NFL. We as Black people were overly represented in these areas, and yet we never hear boo that's racist. But everywhere else, we scream racism, and I just wish that we would just go a little bit deeper in the analysis whenever we see these things. What is it in the culture? Is it in the way that we're bringing up our children in society that's promoting people to to go into certain areas and occupations like that I feel would be much more useful and helpful rather than just saying, oh, racial inequity or racism. I'm saying this as a black woman. I attended Ivy League schools, and I always felt in the back of my mind, are you judging me because you think I'm here and I didn't deserve it? Whenever we do that and we eliminate merit-based systems, it always makes those of us who are trying to work hard feel like people are judging us as if we didn't work hard to get here.
Well, Bonnie,
thank you, Larry.
Bonnie, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. I went to an Ivy League school, too. My girlfriend was a dancer. She tried out to be a cheerleader, and she didn't make it. And I went to a game, I think one game, and all the cheerleaders were black, even though virtually all the players were white. Merit-based, these white girls, she told me, just couldn't do the steps they were doing. But nobody complained. Nobody said we ought to have a race-based determination for cheerleaders. We have more white ones.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Senator Thom Tillis of the great state of North Carolina. Hello, Senator. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. Greetings from the Tar Heel State.
It's good to talk to you again. Congratulations. I don't think I've talked to you since your big win in November. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. It was hard fought, very expensive, but we prevailed.
What are we going to do in this cycle in the Tar Heel State? Senator, we need you to have a colleague, and Senator Burr is retiring.
Well, that's exactly right. It's going to be one of the most targeted states. It was a $300 million raise last year, Hugh, and I expect it's going to be probably $350 million raise. They want to focus on North Carolina just like they did in the last session. Thank goodness we won. A 50-50 split in the Senate is very different from a 49-51 split. Now we've got to gain some seats, and we have them in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, holding those seats, taking a look at Arizona, going after Georgia, going after New Hampshire. There's a map that gets us back to a majority and ends this foolishness that Schumer and Pelosi are trying to pull.
Yeah, but that map falls apart if North Carolina isn't hold. So we need a candidate like you. I mean, you were indefatigable. I think I ran into you 4 years ago dialing for support at the NRCC operation, the NRSC operation. Have you identified someone yet who will have the NRSC support and the party's support and represents all factions of the Republican Party like you do?
We have a couple of candidates in mind. Of course, we're still eyeing whether or not Laura Trump's thinking about getting into the race. But we've got some. They're going to match up. The Democrats are recruiting. They've already got 3 in the race, and there may be a couple more joining. So it's all eyes are going to be on North Carolina. We've got to hold that seat. Richard's been a great senator. He's retiring. We've got to get somebody to backfill that position.
Now, Senator, I want to turn to your time on armed services ahead. Democrats do 2 things. They spend money we don't have at sums larger than we have ever spent before. Republicans spend money too. I'm not hypocritical about this, but they simply double and triple the deficits we've had before. And they don't spend any of it on defense. And there isn't a dime for defense in this $6 trillion that we've spent on COVID relief. Now they're going to come for the armed services budget. What are you going to do about that?
Well, we've got to hold up against it. We just had a briefing for the generals responsible for North and South America, and they're saying that they've got only a fraction of the intelligence, the surveillance, reconnaissance tools that they need for that part in our hemisphere. They're concerned with China moving in. There was a publicly available graphic that they shared with us last week, and it is remarkable over the last less than 5 years, the number of relationships that they've built, the infrastructure that they're building out in South America. So we're not even talking about the risk in the Middle East, the South China Sea, but here in our own hemisphere, this is not a time where we can reduce spending for the military. We've got to advance our weapon systems, hypersonics, defensive missile systems, or I should say systems, need to be deployed permanently down in the South China Sea, down in Guam. We're going the wrong direction if we think that we can take money out of defense. And quite honestly, it's a shame that with the Department of Defense taking on all that they have in the war on COVID, that they would even be considering the proposition.
Now, Senator Tillis, Captain Jerry Hendricks has written a book called To Provide and Maintain. It's a short little 150-page monograph on the Navy that we need as opposed to the Navy that we have. Have you had a chance to read it yet?
No, I haven't, but we did have we had an oversight hearing about a month ago, hearing from the Navy, and the fact that we need to push up. The Navy of the future is going to look differently. We're still going to have aircraft carriers, frigates, destroyers, the ships that you would normally think about, but we have to get into autonomous and semi-autonomous vehicles. We've got to do things very differently. China's doing it. Russia's doing it. Just take a look at the fleet of icebreakers that Russia has compared to ours. They measure theirs in dozens. We measure ours in ones.
Yeah, I strongly recommend the Hendricks book, but I also finished this weekend Josh Rogan's Chaos Under Heaven about the Chinese Communist Party. And this is an all of the above attack on America in every level, in every way, from military, economic, espionage. Do you believe your colleagues on the other side of the aisle fully recognize the challenge the Chinese Communist Party presents to us?
I think they may recognize it, but I'm not sure they have the will to act on it. There are human rights abuses, what they've done already in Africa, what they're doing right now in South America, the economic tools that they use that we don't. China is our greatest threat, and they are on a path to achieving their goal of economic and military superiority. But look, we unilaterally disarmed by what the Biden administration, the Democrat majorities in the House are doing on energy policy. Why on earth would we relinquish our role as the world's energy superpower? Once you do that, then you're increasing our cost, you're reducing our ability to work with our partners and allies, and aiding and abetting China's goal of economic and military supremacy.
Now, a senior East Asian diplomat told me last week, Senator, one-on-one, that they expect Taiwan to be taken over by China by 2027. If any hostility is commenced, invasion or little green men kind of stuff that Putin pulled in Ukraine and that China pulled in Hong Kong, will the United States respond?
I hope that we will, because if we don't, we're just accelerating their China supremacy strategy. But I don't know if this president and this Congress, if that were to occur over the next 2 years or over the next 4 years, I'm concerned that we would not act in the way that I believe that President Trump and past presidents would. And that would be the first step that China would take. We've already seen what they've done to Hong Kong. They're going to try and replicate that, and that is dangerous for that part of the world. It's also dangerous for our own national security.
Is aggression against Taiwan by the Chinese Communist Party a tripwire for major power conflict?
I think that it could be. And I think that to make it work, we have to have our partners down in the region and our allies as focused on it. I do sense a shift on the part of our partners and allies to understand the threat as we've understood it for several years. But it's going to take an assertive projection of power in that region. It needs to start now, Hugh. We don't want to wait until that whatever strategy they would use on Taiwan begins. We need to position ourselves there to make it untenable for China to act.
Now, the Biden administration sent probably their two toughest on China voices to Alaska, Tony Blinken, who actually is pretty good on China, and Jake Sullivan, who's very good. But they were cajoled and insulted by the Chinese delegation. Meanwhile, we have Susan Rice and John Kerry, who are old hands at appeasement of China. Which do you expect to dominate the president's thinking?
It's really hard to tell right now because the president seems to be easily influenced by those around him. So it could be the last person in the room. I hope that that's not true. We need to call China out on their human rights abuses. We need to call China out on the Belt and Road partners that they've established in this hemisphere. And we need to use every economic device necessary to hold them accountable, up to and including their responsibility for the pandemic. But then we need to go back down and re-engage some countries that have drifted in this hemisphere. And we've got to be present in Africa, all the places on the chessboard that China is moving and we're not.
Now, Senator, at Armed Services, you get all the nominees for the Department of Defense. The number 3 fella has been nominated. He's got a Twitter feed that makes Neera Tanden's look like Sesame Street. Is he going to get through?
I really don't know. I think that our members are holding firm. The question is whether or not it's going to be a shirts and skins game. I've had a discussion with a couple of the Democratic members saying you cannot have somebody on there that's, one, blatantly political. All you have to do is take a look at his social media presence, but also take a look at his lenient posture on Iran. The last country that we can possibly engage until their behavior changes or the leadership changes is Iran. They're a threat to the region. We've got to accelerate the relationships that we built, like the ones with the Emirates, with Bahrain, and we can't have somebody who's going to hold back on that. We need to put our foot on the pedal for the normalization relationships with Israel, among Middle East countries, and this guy is bad news. And I'm afraid that he will have a lot of sway with President Biden and that part of the region, and I think to a larger extent, a lenient or working with China posture is more likely to happen than not if Congress doesn't press.
You know, I urged a yes vote on Neera Tanden because I didn't think her tweets were other than standard Republican-Democrat squabbling. But this fellow said the Republicans are the party of ethnic cleansing. That just is, to me, so over the top and insulting that you can't possibly expect him to be respectful of you and the members of the Congress that have oversight.
I don't believe that we would have any kind of working relationship with Dr. Call. I think that he would be a disaster as a key force in policy and defense policy. I believe that any Democrat who votes for them will live to regret it. It's going to weaken our posture. It's going to weaken the Department of Defense. It's going to embolden China. It's going to his nomination or confirmation would embolden Iran and China, the last two countries that we should give any leniency towards. We've got to press on them. He will not do it. I'm hoping that we can stop the confirmation. I think there are some Democrats who are looking at it for a variety of reasons, and he's a real problem. We've got to try and stop him.
Senator Tillis, always a pleasure. Thank you. Keep coming back, Senator Thom Tillis. Good luck on finding your colleague to replace Richard Burr. I appreciate your time always.
Working on it already, Hugh. Thank you so much for what you do.
All right. Now I want to remind everything. One of the things we do is raise money for Food for the Poor. And we do that because every donation matters. And not only do you save lives, and I mean really save lives. Rice and beans saves lives in Honduras. They got wiped out by the storms. COVID crushed their tourism industry. Relief agencies have abandoned it, but not Food for the Poor. We got a voicemail from a great 16-year-old. You got to hear this.
I really admire your work with Food for the Poor each year. And I'm 16 years old. I live at home, so I don't really make a whole lot of money. But I have an envelope that I keep on my nightstand, and each time I do get some money, I put a little bit away. It's for Food for the Poor. This year I saved up $80 to give, and I'm not saying any of this to brag. I just wanted to encourage your listeners who probably make more money than I do. And if you can just spare a little bit, that would be good. Bye.
Sarah, you are a saint. And that which you do will not be forgotten when Judgment Day rolls around for you. And I hope it's a long time off. And I hope you're contributing to Food for the Poor. You picked a great organization. You picked an organization that is rooted in the faith, began as a Catholic organization. It's now non-denominational. It serves everyone, and it serves them well. So if you folks are not out there, I'm in the home stretch, and we've raised a lot of money, but there are a lot of you who've been intending to do it every day, and then you forget when you get to work. Please, today, let it be the day that you go and give $100. Or maybe this is the day when the Holy Spirit really says to you, everybody struggled, but you didn't. You made a lot of money this year. Don't reinvent the wheel. Give it to Food for the Poor. It's like a 10-click effort at HughHewitt.com. Hit that banner. Finally, don't forget your relief factor. Don't leave home without it. Before I got my second Pfizer vaccine and went to sleep for the rest of the weekend, I got my 10 miles in on Saturday. I mean, I'm not going to break any records, but I went up, downhill, and dale, and I'm in good shape. And I really do believe that ReliefFactor.com keeps me in the field, reduces the inflammation, shortens the recovery time. It's the 4 supplements, Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, that everyone should take. It's $19.95, 3-week starter pack. If it doesn't work, forget it. But I think you'll agree, and I've been taking it for years. Relief Factor does, in fact, work. Go nowhere. Josh Kraushaar joins us next on the politics of that confirmation when we return to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Food for the Poor.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
What is the reality for you and your deputies when it comes to the last 58 days in America? Have things changed for you when it comes to illegal migration in your county, Sheriff?
Oh, absolutely. And it's been a disastrous change. It is not a change that we welcomed or are enjoying, that's for sure. You know, immediately overnight, we started having, the last 2 months, we've had 40-plus pursuits where they end in a bailout, which means that they run from us, they stop, everybody bails out of the vehicle into the desert. Typically, they'll leave somebody behind. Like we had one where 12 people bailed out of the car, and they left a 16-year-old Guatemalan girl behind because they know that we're going to have to deal with this unaccompanied minor while all of them go free into this country. Last Wednesday alone, we had 49 apprehensions in one day. It's not uncommon for us to go out and have 20 apprehensions. And mind you, I'm 60 miles off the border. That's how far they're infiltrating into our country. Camouflage clothes. They don't want to be caught. And here's what I know I'm kind of running on, and I'll give you a second.
No. We need to know. Our listeners, our viewers need to know. So you tell us what's changed.
You know, and what I keep telling people, this isn't about immigration anymore. This is about human trafficking and drug trafficking into this country. And if you care about human beings, it shouldn't matter what party you are. If you care about protecting those people, then you should absolutely care about border security, because the cartel is using these people as to gain money. They're raping the women. They're using the children as pawns, which is clear as day right now, and they extort the men.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
I just got an email about someone who says they have to take mandated racial diversity seminar training or whatever it is. And all I have to say is that there is a piece of art, and I don't use that word lightly, that is so perfect, so funny, so politically incorrect, that hits this perfectly. It's from the legendary show The Office. Now, The Office started as an unbelievably politically incorrect show, and then it got into this kind of like quasi-woke thing later on. But the episode Diversity Day with Steve Carell, it's so politically incorrect, especially in today's time. I'm just going to tell you something right now. If I dared repeat some of the lines here, it wouldn't even be an advertiser boycott. I'd be an advertiser invasion. One of my favorite lines is Steve Carell looks into actually, this might be the pilot episode. You see, I'm not an expert in a lot of things, but I am an expert in the central canon of the first season of The Office, because it all went downhill from there. I watched the later. The first season of The Office is so well written, as if they don't care about, they just said, we are going.
Welcome back, America. Ohio University versus Creighton. Nobody knows where Creighton is, but Josh Kraushaar will. It's on at 6:10 East Coast time. Who you picking there, Josh?
You got to go with the Nebraska team. I love it's hard to believe that Ohio University's in the, I guess, the round of 32, and you don't have Ohio State, but I like Creighton. I think Big East is.
Well, you know, what surprised me is I thought you had to be a degree-granting institution, and Ohio University got in. I mean, I'm shocked. When you have a son who goes to Miami, you learn how to rag on the Bobcats. But good luck there, Ohio. And what surprised you the most about the tourney, Josh, other than my Buckeyes going down? That didn't surprise me at all. They sucked at the end of the season. I didn't brag about them last week for a reason.
Yeah, you got to like Oral Roberts, the fifth. It's only the second 15 seed to make it to the Sweet 16. But boy, this has been a tournament of upsets and underdogs, and that's the way I like the NCAA tournament, the buzzer beaters and the surprise underdogs at the very last minute.
We love Chicago Loyola and the Nun. Let's talk about Colin Kahl. Thom Tillis just inveighed against his nomination to be number 3 in the Department of Defense. I got told by a great source that Manchin is not going to support him. What do you hear, Josh Kraushaar?
Yeah, the fact that Joe Manchin has not showed his hand, has not come out in support of Call, I think is a big red flag for Colin Call. Manchin has been lobbied pretty heavily on this issue from both pro-Israel activists and evangelists in his home state of West Virginia. Call, I mean, it's sort of a double whammy against him. His championing of the Iran deal and his criticism of a lot of Trump's Middle East policy that turned out to be quite successful, but also his Twitter behavior. I mean, that goes back to the New York Candid standard, where Manchin was very clear that, trolling people on Twitter, attacking lawmakers in very, very, brutal ways, that's something he pays close attention to. So his judgment on Middle East policy is one thing. His behavior in terms of dealing with public officials and trolling people on Twitter, that's something that Manchin voted against Tandon for. I think he may use that line again for Colin Call.
No, I had no objection to Tandon. I thought it was ordinary Beltway sniping. But Colin Cowell said that the Republicans are the party of ethnic cleansing. That's attributing genocide to a party. It's so crazy.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is sort of this. With Tandon, it was more the tweets. With Call, it's a combination of his policy judgment in terms of the Iran deal, in terms of his view of the Abraham Accords and his view of the moving of the embassy, the U.S. embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. He predicted a lot of negative after effects, which never came to fruition. So there's some real concern about his policy judgment. But when you combine that with the tweets, when you combine that with just the below the belt attacks on Twitter, there's a question of whether he has the temperament and the type of character necessary to have a high post at the Pentagon.
So I had a long conversation with Tony Fauci today, which is getting quite a lot of reaction on Twitter. But I also had a long conversation with Josh Kraushaar about his book, Chaos Under Heaven. Have you had a chance to read it yet, Josh?
I have not, no.
It's got amazing reporting on Team Trump throughout it. And I'm curious, where is Navarro now? He comes across in the book as maybe the most explosive personality in the administration other than Trump. And really, you wonder, I've known Peter for 30 years. He's a very charming guy, but to engage in shouting matches in the Oval Office is not really the way you do policy. Where is he now? Anyone know?
Well, I think he's made some television appearances. I don't know if he has another full-time position. He used to be a Democrat. This is a former Democrat who became one of Trump's bigger, but you know him well, I'm sure.
Forever. Ran for Congress, ran for mayor of San Diego, ran for county, always a left-wing, no-growth Democrat. How he ended up in the White House is always amazing to me.
Right, he was a Hillary guy back in the day.
Yeah.
And now he's a Trump guy, kind of one of the few people in that mix. But, I don't know. I mean, look, he made a lot of enemies. He's someone who, as you know, speaks his mind and whatever the consequences. But, Trump liked him. He has allies in that side of Trump world. And, I actually don't know what his next steps. I don't have particularly close ties to him, but I haven't heard what he's doing next. I know he's made some TV appearances as a commentator since he left the office.
Now, Josh, this is very early, but is the National Journal going to run a top tier and a second tier? Right now, I think in alphabetical order, Tom Cotton, Kristi Noem, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo are in the top tier. Anybody else up there? And Ron DeSantis. I should have put Ron DeSantis in there.
Don't forget DeSantis. I mean, I think it's so early. We'll be doing our power rankings in a few years. I think it's a little too early, but having someone from outside of Washington, I think, is going to be a big factor. If it's not going to be Trump, I don't think being in Washington, having the baggage of all the votes and the direct ties to Trump from 2020 are going to be the best asset for a Republican in a few years. I think whoever the nominee is going to be someone from a governorship or someone from outside of Washington.
I think you're going to need to know about China. I really do recommend to you Chaos Under Heaven, Josh. We'll talk about it in the weeks ahead, but it's one of those must-read books that comes along and you say, wow, this was needed to be written. Josh Kraushaar, follow him on Twitter at Hotline Josh. Thank you. Want to thank Adam and Ben and Harley. Generalissimo is taking a day off today. Unbelievable. I mean, Monday morning, and he's leaving me. But he is going to post the Josh Kraushaar and the Tony Fauci interviews. And Tony Fauci will be over at my YouTube channel. Please go and subscribe. Also, my podcast, The Interview with Hugh Hewitt and The Rundown. Subscribe to those as well. Give us a 5-star rating and give us a review as well. Those podcasts are spreading like kudzu in the South, and that's a great thing. The interview with Hugh Hewitt and the rundown. Thanks, America.